Chapter 163. In a misty mansion in the British Isles, the mistress of the house, Grace, woke up from a nightmare once again. She wiped the corners of her eyes and pulled herself together to start a busy day. Her husband was not at home, so she had to be strong. She did not know why, but some time ago, the servants in the house suddenly disappeared. So she posted an advertisement to recruit servants. Today, 3 people came to apply. A white-haired gardener, a hale and hearty old woman, and a cowering mute girl. The combination of the 3 looked very strange, but because no one came to apply for the job after the advertisement was posted for a long time, Grace still accepted them and introduced them to the rules of the mansion. Not knowing if it was because of the 3 people, all kinds of strange things began to happen in the mansion. Her daughter, Anne, claimed that she saw a little boy. Grace also heard some strange sounds from time to time. Moreover, she also found that the 3 new servants were always whispering to each other, as if they were planning something. Regarding this, Grace became more and more uneasy. Until one day, her husband, who had gone out to war, suddenly came back. The excited Grace thought that there was a backbone in the family, and that life would return to normal. However, her husband didn't have the joy of reunion like Grace did. Instead, when he saw his wife and children, he became sad. After spending a few days at home, he suddenly left again. The strange happenings in the old house continued. Coupled with the fact that her husband had left once again, Grace's mental state became more and more tense. Finally, one day, she discovered that all the curtains in the old house had been torn down. Grace repeatedly emphasized that the 2 sick children should not be exposed to the sun. Thus, the furious mistress blamed all of this on the 3 servants and chased them out. One night, the 2 playful children jumped through the window and ran out of the backyard garden. The little girl, Anne, found 3 tombstones. Upon closer inspection, she was shocked to find that the names of the 3 new servants were engraved on the tombstones. At the same time, the 3 servants came out of the darkness again and called her brother and ran to the door. Grace, who accidentally discovered the truth, also rushed out with a rifle. She protected the children and returned to the old mansion, blocking the 3 ghosts outside the door. While Grace was repeatedly praying for the 3 spirits to let her family off, the 2 children who had returned upstairs let out screams of fear. Grace prayed as she climbed up the stairs and pushed open a door. Because of the spirit master's spirit summoning, Grace finally saw another family in the real world. Everything made Grace face the reality. It turned out that she and the 2 children were already dead. Helplessly hugging the 2 children, the heartbroken mistress could not help but recall the sad past. In the dreamy cries of Grace and the 2 children, the movie officially ended. The ending credits had not been produced yet, so the lights in the screening hall were directly turned on. "Eric, how was it this time?" Jonathan Dimey asked unconfidently. Although he had made a lot of changes according to Eric's suggestions, Jonathan was still not sure if Eric would be satisfied. Terror of an Island wrapped up in mid-June. Part of the post-production was also carried out in the UK. Because some scenes had to be shot from time to time, the whole crew stayed in the UK until July before returning to the US. After the end of Dark War, Eric had visited the shooting site in the UK once to personally see the shooting site. After checking some of the scenes that Jonathan had shot, Eric was very satisfied with Jonathan's shooting results. Perhaps because of Eric's previous affirmation, when Jonathan confidently showed the version that he had edited, the so-called director's version, to Eric, he was still very confident that the version that he had spent a lot of effort editing would be recognized by Eric. However, reality poured a bucket of cold water on Jonathan's hopes. Eric frowned as he watched the edited version. He signaled the staff to play it from the beginning. At the same time, he quickly made notes as he watched. By the time the film finished playing again, Eric had already written more than 20 amendments on his notepad. They involved the camera, the soundtrack, the editing, and other aspects. Basically, it was equivalent to completely pushing Jonathan's edited version away. Although Jonathan was a little unconvinced, he did not have the final editing rights after all. He could only honestly make major changes according to Eric's suggestions. After completing the production according to Eric's suggestions, Jonathan looked at the film again and felt that this version was indeed much better than the one he had edited before. Not only was the plot more compact, but the suspense was also more complicated. Moreover, it focused more on the creation of a psychological suspense environment. This also made Jonathan admire this young man who was more than 20 years younger than him even more. Although Jonathan had done a lot of preparation work in order to get the position of director of this movie, and some of the ideas proposed at the beginning were also in line with Eric's vision, many of the techniques still could not escape the stereotype of old-fashioned horror movies. This was not that Jonathan did not want to change, but many habits could not be changed easily. Innovation was easier said than done in any circle. Hearing Jonathan's question, Eric didn't answer it immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and carefully compared the differences and similarities between the original film in his mind and the one he had just watched. Among the 3 films that Firefly had invested in, Island Horror, Steel Magnolias, and Smell a Woman, Eric was most optimistic about the box office prospects of Island Horror. Therefore, he was most concerned about this film. For the other 2 movies, Steel Magnolias and Women by Smell, Eric had delegated much more power than Island Horror. Steel Magnolias was completely under the charge of Herbert Ross, and Eric did not even participate in the editing. Although the final editing rights of Women by Smell were in Eric's hands, he would also respect Al Pacino's opinions in the future post-production. In comparison, the production of Shock on a Small Island seemed to be a little stubborn. He also knew that it would be very hurtful to completely overturn Jonathan's director's edited version, but he had to do so in order to achieve box office success. The reason why Eric was able to list so many changes in one breath when he saw Jonathan's edited version was, of course, not because of his own talent, but because of the reference of the original film in his mind. Even if he had a little bit of talent in his previous life, it had been worn away after so many years. What was left was only the professional skills imprinted in his instincts and habits. He was like a master chef who had been in the kitchen for decades. He didn't need to use his brain at all, and could cook up a table of delicious dishes just based on habit. For a movie, even if it was the same script and the same material, the film edited by different people would be very different. In Eric's previous life, he had heard that someone had edited a classic serious historical film into a vulgar comedy film by re-editing the scenes. The lines, material, music, and so on were unchanged, but the scenes were rearranged. Therefore, Eric did not ask for a perfect copy of Island Horror that was exactly the same as the one in his memory. Besides, the film in his previous life was not without flaws. For example, the plot of Grace's husband's return was too dull to create the tense and suspenseful atmosphere that a horror film should have. Eric had made some changes to the original plot in this version. After spending about 10 minutes to carefully compare it, Eric nodded gently. Not bad, basically it's done. We just need to make 1 or 2 small changes. As for the distribution, Jeffrey, except for Fox and Columbia, inform the people in charge of the other 4 major film companies to see if they are interested in participating in our internal test. Jonathan heard Eric's affirmative words and finally breathed a sigh of relief, but Jeffrey was a little hesitant. Eric, it's not good to not inform Fox and Columbia. After all, we have the closest cooperation with these 2 companies. Eric spread his hands and explained, according to the current situation, after Columbia is bought by the Japanese, there will be a lot of personnel changes. It's hard to say how the Japanese will manage Columbia after they get it. Even now, I'm a little worried about whether I can get the share of Dark War back on time, so it's better not to cooperate with them in the short term. As for Fox, they already have the distribution rights of my next 2 films. If we give it to them, it will only cause us to compete with our own film for resources. Jeffrey suggested, how about this? We will invite Fox and Columbia as usual. As for whether they cooperate in the end, isn't it still up to us in the end? If we don't invite them, it will be a little rude. Eric lowered his head and thought for a moment, then nodded. Well, we'll do as you say. Also, we'll put Steel Magnolias together for a test screening. As for Smelling Women, we'll put it aside for the time being. Let us slowly work on it. As long as it can be screened on a small scale at the end of the year, it'll be fine. Anyway, this film is used by him to compete for the Oscars. After the 2 of them finished discussing the distribution of the film, Jonathan Dime had a chance to interject. Eric, will you go to the Venice Film Festival in September? Yes, I will at least go during the opening ceremony or the award ceremony, replied Eric. Among the 3 major film festivals in Europe, the Venice Film Festival was the one with the closest ties to the Chinese film industry. Eric was very interested in the Venice Film Festival in his previous life. This time there was a chance, so of course he would go. Speaking of which, it had been a whole year since his rebirth. Eric had been in a busy state and did not even have time to relax. Perhaps the trip to Venice could be treated as a vacation. As for the award, Eric did not have high expectations. Although the plot of Terror Island was very novel, the film was not only a commercial film, but also a horror film. Both of these categories were very discriminated against by the film festival judges. However, this film included both of these most disliked elements. It was already a good result to be nominated for the main competition section in Venice. Chapter 164. I got someone to find an apartment in Beverly Hills. The monthly rent is $4,000. You can call this number tomorrow and mention Alan Fisman's name. A real estate agent will sign a contract with you. That night, Eric returned home. After dinner, he took out a business card and handed it to Nicole. Before the girl could take it, a small hand quickly snatched the business card away. Wow, wow. Drew waved the business card in his hand and stared at Nicole with a victorious smile. So you're finally moving out? Nicole shrugged helplessly and sat back on the sofa in a ladylike manner. She had no intention of coming over to fight for the business card, nor did she answer Drew's question. During this period of time, the girl had also come up with a way to deal with Drew. In the face of Drew's various provocations, although there were many times in the depths of her heart that she couldn't wait to rush into the kitchen to find a sharp knife and cut off that eyesore face of hers, from the beginning to the end, Nicole had a magnanimous look on her face that said, I won't lower myself to your level. She even guessed the reason why Drew was looking for trouble with her. Although this seemingly careless girl was only 14 years old, she was as shrewd as a little fairy. Nicole felt that the childish things she did were not really like ordinary children who gained pleasure from bullying others. She just wanted to make Nicole lose her self-control, and even make her unable to bear the conflict with her. She even wanted Nicole to make some counterattacks when she was bullied. In that way, when the two of them became incompatible, one of them would definitely have to leave the mansion. Nicole was also sure that even if she was on the right side, the one who would be kicked out of the mansion in the end would definitely be herself. Nicole did not mind falling out with Drew, but she was afraid of losing the opportunity to be the female lead in Sleepless in Seattle. She was very afraid. After this period of contact and understanding, she had a deeper understanding of the value of being the female lead in Eric's movie. Therefore, she became more respectful in front of Eric. Compared to this opportunity, 2 months of being a servant in this mansion was like nothing. If she could ensure the result, she would not mind wearing a beautiful small uniform and being a maid for a year. Many women might not encounter such a good opportunity even after working for 8 to 10 years in Hollywood. In comparison, a month or 2 or even a year was nothing. In various media reports, not to mention Julia Roberts, even Brooke Scholes, who only appeared in Dark War for a few minutes, recently received a female lead role in a big production from Warner. The newspaper estimated that her salary was close to $3 million, which was almost the price of many A-list actresses. Before acting in Dark War, although Brooke Scholes was beautiful and glamorous, she could only be regarded as a third-rate star at most. Moreover, her acting skills had always been criticized by the media, and her box office appeal was non-existent. Although Eric had made a series of promises before, and although there was a contract, the girl had always maintained a cautious attitude until the last moment. Okay, Drew, give the business card back to Nicole. If you don't want her to leave, I don't mind letting her stay for a while. Eric glared at Drew, who was waving the business card, and said. Knowing that Eric was joking, the girl stuck out her tongue cooperatively. She rolled up the business card with a smirk, leaned in front of the girl, and directly stuffed it into Nicole's collar. In the end, she gloated and added, Poor thing, there's nothing to hold, so it fell down. Nicole glanced at Eric. Although she knew that she would not get a response, she still showed an aggrieved expression. Seeing that Eric was still looking at a child playing, the girl could only reach out and cover the business card that fell on her abdomen. She got up and walked to the bathroom, ready to take it out. When Nicole went into the bathroom, the little girl directly jumped into Eric's arms. "What's wrong? Are you feeling bad?" Nicole didn't have it easy. She was bullied by you for more than a month and didn't say anything. "If it were me, I would have poured sulfuric acid on your face." Eric smiled and gently pinched the girl's white and tender face. "She wouldn't," Drew snorted softly. He moved his body like a small snake and found a comfortable position to rest on Eric's lap. He reached out and touched the stubble on Eric's chin. Only a brainless girl like Jennifer Aniston would do that. And this woman, if it didn't benefit her, she would never do it. "Oh, the next time I see Jenny, I'll definitely tell her your comments." Drew smiled and waved his hand, looking indifferent. "Whatever, let her face reality as soon as possible. Earth is so dangerous, it's only right for her to dig a hole and bury herself in it." Eric couldn't help but smile. Perhaps it was because he had watched that classic movie in his previous life. Eric would occasionally say words like Earth and Mars when he spoke. Unknowingly, the little girl in his arms learned it. "I think if Jenny were to dig a hole, she would definitely bury you first." "Hee, she doesn't have that ability." Drew smiled and quickly became serious again. He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Eric, I don't care how you play with this stupid woman, but don't provoke that woman in the bathroom. It'll be troublesome if you get entangled with her." That's right. Ever since I got entangled with a certain little vixen, I don't dare to provoke women of the same type anymore." "I'm serious." Drew scratched Eric's chin in dissatisfaction. "Actually, it's also your fault. It's fine if others play with her, but you can't help but get entangled with her after you've played with her." Eric knew that Drew was referring to Virginia. He helplessly turned his head to avoid the little scratches. "Okay, I got it." The sound of leather shoes could be heard, and the two of them stopped talking at the same time. The girl returned to the sofa and sat down. She didn't show any abnormality and continued chatting with Eric as usual. However, she recalled what Drew said by accident just now. Then, she thought about how the little girl had been on guard against her during this period of time. She suddenly understood that she seemed to have missed a better opportunity. Originally, Nicole was a little complacent about getting this role without having to pay any price. Now she realized that it was her real loss that she didn't pay any price. Chapter 165. Late at night, in Nicole's bedroom on the second floor of the villa, looking at the packed suitcase, the girl suddenly felt that the experience of the past 2 months was like a dream. 7 years ago, she got the opportunity to play a role in a music video for the first time. It was also that experience that made her feel that maybe her life could be more dazzling. Beautiful women were always very ambitious. So she quickly dropped out of the girls' high school, looking for opportunities while studying at the drama school. In a few years, she played some supporting roles in many movies and TV series, and also won the Best Actress award at the Australian Film Academy. But these were far from enough to make the girl feel satisfied. Her eyes never stopped on the small pool of the Australian entertainment industry. She yearned for Hollywood. At the beginning of the year, she participated in a Hollywood movie audition in Australia. She was full of confidence, but in the end, she still didn't get the role. Then she found that she was already 22 years old, and she couldn't wait any longer, so she packed her luggage and came to Los Angeles alone. Then she quickly realized the cruelty of reality. Her acting qualifications, and the acting award she received in Australia didn't help her career much. She was basically like a newcomer, and could only get some small roles in some unknown movies or TV series. Then 2 months ago, her career finally ushered in a big turning point. She was seen by the young director Eric Williams, who suddenly rose to fame in Hollywood. And then she got the lead role in his new film. How could there be such a good thing? Walking out of the office, the girl began to think of this voice in her heart. She spent the next few days in a fierce struggle of emotions. She was very, very eager to get this opportunity, but she felt that if she agreed, what awaited her would be a hellish life of horror, and it might become a nightmare for her life. She was not a little girl who was inexperienced in the world. A few days later, she finally couldn't resist the desire to be famous and took the initiative to come to the door. But the horrible situation in her imagination didn't happen. He really just dressed her up beautifully, and then she washed, cooked, and cleaned the room for him every day. His life was healthy and regular, without bad habits, and without the vanity of a young man who became famous. He was only 18 years old, but he was calm like a middle-aged man who had experienced the world. He was young, rich, talented, handsome, and steady. In the eyes of most women, he had all the qualities that a man could possess. Even if she rationally told herself that it was impossible and that it was better to be safe, she still couldn't help but have a faint admiration for this man who was younger than her. In the beginning, she had tried to get close to him, but unfortunately, she didn't succeed and instead made a fool of herself. He even regarded her seductive actions as a performance, and watched it with relish. If she didn't know that he had a girlfriend, a little minx at home, and would occasionally spend the night outside, she would definitely think that he was gay. The proportion of gay people in Hollywood was too high. She put on her pajamas, tidied up the uniform she had been wearing for a long time, and hung it in the wardrobe. She closed the wardrobe, turned around and climbed into the Pangmu bed, and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, a slender figure kept rolling for a while. Perhaps she should try it again. She remembered the conversation between Eric and Drew after dinner. She couldn't help but come up with such an idea. Although she couldn't be this man's girlfriend or wife, it would save her 10 years of hard work, but at least she should leave a deep impression on him. From her analysis of the conversation between the two people, doing so would certainly be helpful to her career. After a while, she finally thought of a good excuse. Actually, it wasn't really an excuse. She originally intended to tell him in the evening, but Drew, that little goblin, was always there. She didn't want to be laughed at by that hateful little girl. So she planned to tell him tomorrow when she left. Now it just came in handy. Turning on the light, the girl sat up, thought for a moment, and opened the packed suitcase. She found a bottle of perfume and sprayed it on her body. She rarely used this perfume, because after she used it once, he said that the smell was too strong and he didn't like it. In order to please him, she didn't use it again. But this time, it might be useful, because the perfume was musky rose. She looked at her watch and sat there for a while. When the hand of the watch pointed to 12 o'clock, she gently opened the door and carefully walked through the corridor to Eric's door. She gently knocked on the door a few times, took a deep breath and patiently waited. She knew that he could hear her. He was usually busy in the study until 11 o'clock, so he certainly hadn't fallen asleep yet. After a moment, the door opened. Eric, who was wearing pajamas, looked at Nicole with a puzzled expression. His eyes flickered a few times. "Nicole, it's so late. What's the matter?" "Eric, this matter is very difficult to talk about, but I don't know many people in Los Angeles, and there is no one who can help." Nicole's calm expression became nervous. "Huh." Eric still didn't move aside to let the girl in. "I mean, can you lend me some money? Didn't you say that the rent for the apartment is $4,000 a month? But I don't have much money now." Nicole's voice became slightly stuttering. It wasn't an act. She did have a stutter when she was a child, and although it was cured when she grew up, she would still stutter when she was nervous. Eric held the door frame and nodded. "I see. Wait a moment, I'll go get the checkbook." As Eric spoke, he turned around. Just as he was about to remind her of something, the girl had already followed him into the bedroom. Eric could only let nature take its course. Fortunately, he had forced the girl into the closet. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if she was discovered. "Is 100,000 enough?" Eric found the checkbook and looked up at the girl. Nicole quickly nodded. "It's enough. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the money." "Don't worry, you can pay me back when you have the money." "Heh, I'm sure you'll have the money after your first movie is released." At the beginning of the year, Julia was still living in a rented apartment. Now, not only has she bought a mansion in Beverly Hills, but she has also hired several assistants and bodyguards. "She's more important than me." Eric casually talked about Julia's interesting things as he lowered his head to fill in the checkbook. Chapter 167. Although the two of them had an intimate relationship, Nicole didn't stay in Eric's mansion for another day. She obediently moved into the apartment that Eric had someone find for her that day. It was August. For a movie that was in its fourth week of release, Dark War's $26 million box office was still strong. The total box office was more than $150 million. Although it would take a lot of luck to surpass Batman's box office in the coming weeks, there was no doubt that the movie's total box office in North America would exceed $200 million. Moreover, Dark War was more popular in the overseas market than in North America. Although it was released later in most overseas countries than in North America, and there were even some countries where it had not been released yet, Dark War had won 12 first-week box office titles in the countries where it had been released. Under such circumstances, it was certain that the overseas box office of Dark War would be much higher than in North America. Although Columbia had invested in the movie with the intention of not making a profit and only wanted to push up the stock price, the fact was that not only could they recoup their investment, but they could also make a lot of money just from the box office alone. Columbia was destined to take a large share of the video revenue. Although it would take a long time for the video to recoup its investment, in the next few years, the revenue would bring Columbia Pictures hundreds of millions of USD in profit. For Eric, the project of Dark War was already in the past. He just had to wait for his share of the profits. Dark War was such a popular movie, and according to Hollywood's usual practice, there would definitely be sequels. However, to be safe, Eric did not plan to participate in the production of the sequels. It was difficult to surpass the first classic. In his previous life, the sequels of Dark War did not have many highlights. If the script of the future sequels was good, Eric only planned to let Firefly participate in part of the investment. If the Japanese could offer a good price, Eric would even sell Firefly's half of the copyright of Dark War to them. After all, without Cruise, without Eric, and with only Hanks left, it would be difficult for the sequels of Dark War to replicate the success of the first movie. Based on the investment practice of this kind of movie, the cost of the second movie would definitely increase greatly. It would not be easy to make money then. After the Dark War project was over, Eric began his intense work for the second half of the year. First of all, he had to personally film the first 2 episodes of Friends. For this reason, Fox had already released this gimmick. Because of the insertion of Friends in Dark War, the public was also looking forward to this TV series. Sleepless in Seattle, which was the second last movie of the year, was actually the last one that Eric would put his heart into producing. Although Fox valued Home Alone very much, this movie would not consume much of Eric's energy in any case. Moreover, he planned to use the second script from his previous life, so it would be easier to shoot. Although Sleepless in Seattle was only in the early stages of preparation, the early publicity work had already begun, and the news of the leading actors was soon revealed. When they saw that the names of the leading actors and actresses had been decided, many actors in Hollywood who wanted to work with Eric were disappointed. Tom Hanks was not questioned as the leading actor, but Nicole, who seemed to have suddenly appeared, became the target of the media. With the announcement of the lead actor, Nicole's personal information was dug up by powerful paparazzi in just a few days. Australian actress, won acting awards, debuted at the age of 16, and had no acting experience in Hollywood. When this information was revealed, the girl quickly became the focus of a wave of controversy. The fact that Hollywood looked down on foreign actors seemed to have infected the media. Therefore, apart from the promotional materials arranged by UTA for the girl, Nicole basically didn't receive many words of recognition. It was almost one-sided criticism. Most of the media felt that Nicole didn't deserve to be the female lead in Eric's new film. From the title of Sleepless in Seattle, the media also guessed that Eric was likely to return to a romantic comedy like Pretty Woman. Therefore, the Hollywood media ignored Nicole's current image, and instead enjoyed digging up Nicole's rustic image in Australian movies and TV series, criticizing the girl as worthless. Of course, this kind of criticism would also be counterattacked. The biggest reaction was the Australian media. Although Eric only had a few works, and his rise was not long ago, he had accumulated a lot of fame in Australia, no less than those famous directors who had been famous for many years. Therefore, the Australian media was proud that their country's actress could participate in Eric's new film, and also launched a lot of counterattacks against the American media's criticism of Nicole. Nicole, who was in the center of the storm, did not feel any pressure at all. She understood that the more the media made a fuss, the more fame it would bring to her. On the 2nd of August, in a studio on the set of Fox, the filming of Friends started. Among the 6 leads, only Jennifer Aniston was a little famous. The other young people were all unknown characters before. Eric chose them not only because of their acting skills, but also because they were very similar to the images of the leads in Friends in his memory. In addition, as newcomers, these actors' salaries were very low, only $5,000 per episode. Eric originally wanted to secretly give Jennifer Aniston a higher salary. The salary was confidential, and as long as he did not say anything, the other members would not know. Even if the other 5 found out, they would certainly not say anything. Jennifer Aniston was not only more famous than them, but she was also the producer's daughter and the director's girlfriend. If they really compared themselves to Jennifer Aniston, they were simply asking for trouble. However, Eric's kind suggestion was rejected by Jennifer Aniston, and she took the same $5,000 per episode as the others. Eric could not persuade the stubborn girl, so he could only leak the news. Unsurprisingly, it received a good effect. Jennifer Aniston quickly became good friends with the other 5 leads, just like in his previous life. This result was very beneficial to the filming of Friends. After all, if they became real friends in real life, they would definitely have a better understanding during the filming process. Everyone get ready. Friends Act 1 Scene 5 Action. Following the voice of the script clerk, in a cafe in Central Park, several of the leads began to chat. The scene was Ross, who had divorced his wife, appeared in the cafe with an umbrella in his hand, looking depressed. In the original version, Ross Geller, who was played by David Simeon, shocked many of the audience when he appeared for the first time. With just a simple word of hi, the audience instantly remembered the image of this tall and thin man wearing a large coat. Chapter 168. While Chandler and the others were chatting, Ross suddenly appeared behind the sofa in the coffee shop like a ghost. He held an umbrella in his hand, lowered his head and played with his fingers like a child. He greeted them weakly, "Hi." The originally joyous atmosphere quickly dissipated, and the expressions of Chandler and the others collapsed. "Oh my God, I have the urge to commit suicide as soon as he opens his mouth." Chandler, who was sitting on a chair next to them, had just finished his line when he was called cut. "No, Ross, your little actions just now were very good, but the emotions contained in your lines are still not on point. You have to be a little more depressed and prepare for it. I told you when I was explaining the scene before that this scene is very important to you. I hope the audience can laugh when they hear your first sentence and remember you at the same time." Eric patiently explained to the actor playing Ross on the set. He even directly called him by his character's name. No one felt that there was anything wrong with it. They quietly watched Eric and allowed him to do whatever he wanted. Even Jennifer Aniston, who was wearing a wedding dress and waiting on the side, looked at her boyfriend with a little admiration. Although Eric was young, he was a big director who had accumulated more than $1 billion in box office worldwide. Coming to direct a TV series was enough to make everyone present treat him with respect. "Okay, everyone, get ready. We'll do it again." After Eric finished speaking, he waved to everyone and sat in the director's chair again. Because of the strict requirements for Ross's appearance, this small scene was shot more than 10 times. In the end, the actor playing Ross became obviously nervous, but in the end it was passed. "Jenny, it's your turn." After a few more scenes, Eric said to Jennifer Aniston, who had been waiting on the side. Jennifer Aniston hurriedly lifted the hem of her wedding dress and turned to the entrance of the coffee shop in Central Park. Because it was the first day of work, the crew did not shoot many scenes. It was mainly used to practice the tacit understanding between the actors. Because it was a sitcom, although there was no canned laughter on the set, the atmosphere on set was generally very pleasant. Because Eric was personally directing, most of the people on set seemed to be trembling with fear. However, as time passed, everyone gradually got to know Eric and was no longer nervous. They even joked with Eric. After a few days of practice, the filming of Friends gradually sped up. Eric only prepared for the first 2 episodes personally directed by himself for 2 weeks. This was already considered very relaxed. After all, with the subsequent changes in filming and broadcasting, the crew basically had to produce 2 episodes every week. Eric, let's have dinner together tonight, okay? After a day of filming, Jennifer Aniston, who had changed out of her costume, hugged Eric's arm and said coquettishly. Anyway, everyone around them knew about the relationship between the two, and Jennifer Aniston had no intention of hiding it. I just happened to have an appointment. If you don't mind, you can come with me. Eric replied casually as he scribbled on a document. Jennifer Aniston frowned slightly and couldn't help but ask, is it a guy or a girl? Of course it's a guy. I knew it. Jennifer Aniston still pouted unhappily. If it's a girl, you definitely won't bring me. It seems that other than you, I haven't asked any girl out for dinner. Eric closed the pen lid and inserted it into the folder. He reached out and pinched Jennifer Aniston's face. Jennifer Aniston pushed Eric's hand away unhappily. As if I'd believe you. Who knows what you've been doing behind my back? What's with that Nicole Kidman? What do you mean what's going on? Eric pretended not to understand and responded. Jennifer Aniston wanted to directly ask Eric if he had done anything with the other party, but she swallowed the words back. What could she do if she asked? Even if they hadn't done anything now, what about the future? If something had happened, what could she do? Break up with him? Eric hurriedly finished reading another document, signed it, and handed it to his assistant Alan. Only then did he put his arm around Jennifer Aniston's waist. Okay, let's go back and get ready. I've made an appointment with the other party at 7 o'clock, so there are still 2 hours left. How about you come to my place for a visit? Drew misses you. I miss her too. Upon hearing Drew's name, Jennifer Aniston immediately gritted her teeth. After the conflict between the 2 girls in Eric's ward, they hadn't seen each other again. Jennifer Aniston hadn't been to Eric's place in the past few months either. Usually, it was Eric who took the initiative to visit Jennifer Aniston. Because of this, Jennifer Aniston didn't find out about Nicole's matter from the beginning to the end. It was only when the news of Eric's new female lead was published in the newspaper that Jennifer Aniston found out about Nicole's existence. After saying goodbye to the crew, Eric drove Jennifer Aniston back to the Beverly Hills mansion. Although he said those words, Eric was relieved to see that the little girl wasn't at home. After the incident with Nicole, the little girl only had a cold war with Eric during the day. After Nicole left, the little girl was lovey-dovey again at night, as if nothing had happened. Although it was the second time that Jennifer Aniston came to Eric's mansion, her first experience was a little too terrible. Basically, she didn't have any impression of Eric's home. After discovering that Drew wasn't at home, Jennifer Aniston acted like the hostess of the house, walking up and down the mansion, inside and out. She even ran to Eric's room to mess around a few times. Hey, what are you laughing at? In Eric's bedroom, Jennifer Aniston, who was hugging a pillow, raised her head and saw Eric looking at her with a playful expression. She asked in dissatisfaction. Eric shook his head. Nothing. I'm just curious about what you're doing. Declaring your territory? Jennifer Aniston seemed to have been seen through. She ignored Eric and turned her back to him. Eric shrugged and walked straight in. He opened the closet and picked up some clothes. Jennifer Aniston happened to be wearing a long dress today. It looked very much like a dress. Plus, Jennifer Aniston was a natural beauty, so there was no problem for her to go to the banquet without changing clothes. Okay, let's go. Eric changed his clothes and turned to Jennifer Aniston. Okay. Jennifer Aniston responded, but she didn't immediately get up. Instead, she tilted her body and picked up a long strand of hair from the sheet and waved it at Eric. She looked like she wanted him to explain it to her. Eric shrugged. You must have just dropped it. Jennifer Aniston choked and threw the strand of hair at Eric. She turned over and buried her head in the pillow. Eric walked over. Okay, stop throwing a tantrum. Let's go. Jennifer Aniston shook her body, but didn't move. Eric smirked and suddenly said, "Jenny, there may be Drew's saliva on that pillow." "Oh. Wow, Baba, that's disgusting." When Jennifer Aniston heard Eric's words, she immediately jumped up like a spring. But the pillow hit Eric and she quickly rushed into the bathroom. "Okay, don't be angry." After getting out of the car, Eric handed the keys to the doorman and said to the girl holding his arm, "I said there's absolutely no saliva. That's my pillow. Even if there is, it's my saliva." "Humph, your saliva is even more disgusting." Jennifer Aniston couldn't help but touch her lips again and rolled her eyes. The two of them walked into the restaurant together. Under the guidance of the waiter, they came to a table where a middle-aged man was already waiting. Seeing Eric appear, the middle-aged man stood up with a smile and took 2 steps forward to extend his hand to Eric. "Hello, Mr. Shea." Eric shook hands with him and introduced, "This is my girlfriend, Jennifer Aniston." Jennifer Aniston shook hands with him in a ladylike manner and quietly sat down next to Eric. "Eric, just call me Robert," the middle-aged man said as he sat down. Eric didn't get much information from the other party's expression, but he didn't care. Anyway, things couldn't be settled just because of this meal. Eric understood that this was just a test between the two of them, and it would be difficult for them to reach a consensus. So after ordering, Eric and Robert Shea chatted casually. A Nightmare on Elm Street is indeed a classic in horror movies. The setting of killing in a dream is very novel. Also, as a master of horror movies, Wes Craven also has a unique understanding of the creation of a horror atmosphere. To be honest, Firefly also has a horror movie that has just finished production. When I was choosing a director, I considered Mr. Craven, but unfortunately, for various reasons, we couldn't work together. As they chatted, they naturally talked about New Line's A Nightmare on Elm Street series. Although New Line had been producing independently since 1979, it wasn't until the success of the first, A Nightmare on Elm Street, in 1984 that New Line's strength rose to a new level. Therefore, due to the importance of the A Nightmare on Elm Street series to New Line was even nicknamed Freddy's Little House. Freddy was the main character of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Hearing Eric's flattering comments, Robert Shea's face was a little proud. "Even so, it can't be compared to your Home Alone. I heard that Home Alone only costs $1 million, but it earned $500 million at the box office worldwide. The box office exceeded the cost by 500 times. This kind of return on investment ratio may not be matched by any other movie in the future. I'm sure there will be more," Eric said with a smile. At the same time, he thought of the movie Blair the Witch in his previous life. Although the success of that movie was highly accidental, it was undeniable that the movie had created a miracle. Chapter 169. Jennifer Aniston, who had been sitting quietly next to Eric, was a little confused. When they arrived, Eric did not hide the purpose of inviting Robert Shea from her. However, now that they had eaten more than half of their dinner, the two did not talk about the acquisition of the film company at all. Instead, they talked about all kinds of industry insiders, such as the huge loss of MGM's Heaven's Gate, the box office miracle of Gone with the Wind in 1939 when Robert Shea was born, why Disney rose so quickly, the truth of Thunderbolt's bankruptcy. Anyway, there was nothing about the acquisition of the film company. At least, Jennifer Aniston, who was not very smart, did not notice any signs of this. At first, Jennifer Aniston listened with great interest, but later, she gradually lost interest. However, she did not want to be rude and embarrass her boyfriend, so Jennifer Aniston could only sit upright and listen carefully. Although, her mind had already flown to the horizon. Until the waiter removed the cutlery and replaced it with coffee for them, Eric and Robert Shea's chat still did not end. The latest issue of Variety magazine published a data article. Statistics show that starting next year, the income from videotapes and television broadcasting rights will exceed the movie box office on all fronts. Moreover, the development of the various peripheral copyrights of movies is becoming more and more diversified, so the role of distribution channels will become more and more important in the movie industry chain. In the future, it will be difficult for pure movie content providers to survive. That's a bit one-sided. If there are no good works, then the expansion of distribution channels will be impossible. Hollywood is relying on high-quality movies one after another to expand its territory in the overseas market. If our movies are as stagnant as European movies, and there are very few good movies, then we will definitely be like European movies, where we can only entertain ourselves in a small circle. The highway is important, but without cars, the highway has no value. Moreover, the remuneration of Hollywood movie stars has increased by more than 10 times compared to 10 years ago. And they have even begun to share the profits of the movie. This is the most direct manifestation of the importance of content in the movie market. After Eric finished speaking, he took a sip of coffee and glanced at Robert Shea. Shortly after dinner began, the two exchanged pleasantries and compliments. Unknowingly, they began to fight in secret. Although no one mentioned anything about the acquisition of the company, the two had been arguing about which was more important, the content of the movie or the distribution. Robert Shea was the one who started the discussion. In fact, from that moment on, Robert Shea was already at a disadvantage. Since the other party had brought up the topic, Eric understood that Robert Shea was very tempted by Firefly's proposal to acquire the new line. If the other party was not willing to sell the new line, he would not have brought up the topic at all. Robert Shea, who was sitting opposite him, also felt a little bitter. He realized that he had underestimated the vision and knowledge of the young man sitting opposite him. As an old man who had been in Hollywood for more than 20 years, how could he not understand that once he brought up the topic, it was very likely that the other party would discover his intentions? However, Robert Shea originally thought that Eric was only 19 years old after all. Even if he had some talent in film production, he must know very little about other aspects. On the other hand, he was more than 30 years older than Eric, so it could be said that he had 30 more years of experience. In addition, Robert felt that his eloquence was not bad. Therefore, at first he was very confident that he could suppress Eric. Once he planted the seed that distribution channels are the key, in Eric's mind, Robert would be able to take the initiative in future negotiations. Eric's consecutive films had created miracles in the box office. Therefore, when Eric sent him an invitation and revealed some information, Robert Shea's mind became active. Firefly's acquisition of the new line was certain. Robert Shea did not even consider the possibility of the reverse. However, although Robert Shea was already 50 years old, he was still very ambitious. He did not care about the huge amount of money that Firefly would need to acquire the new line. Instead, he hoped to achieve the merger of the two companies and get as much equity as possible in the merged company. The new line's development had reached a bottleneck. Among the second-tier film companies, the new line was already one of the best. It had a film series with a stable income, and had also built a good distribution channel in the United States. It also had a fixed partner for overseas distribution. What was even more commendable was that the new line had not relied on any film giant for its development. It had completely maintained a state of independent operation. However, compared to the 6 major film companies, the new line was still very far behind. The main reason for this difference was that the new line lacked blockbuster films at the box office. Or rather, there were none at all. So far, the new line's best-grossing film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, had only grossed over $40 million at the box office. For the film to be considered a blockbuster, the North American box office had to be around $100 million to qualify. Without blockbuster films, the new line was destined to be unable to enter the ranks of the giants. The 280 law in the Hollywood box office market was particularly obvious. Every year, 20% of the films divided more than 80% of the box office revenue. The top 10 films on the annual box office rankings had always been monopolized by the 6 major film companies. This meant that more than 80% of the box office revenue was in the hands of the 6 major film companies. In fact, the proportion of the 6 major film companies had decreased over the years. Due to the vigorous development of various channels, independent film companies had a lot of room for development. Therefore, the 6 major film companies only accounted for about 85% of the total box office revenue each year, leaving 15% for the other Hollywood film companies. This proportion seemed small, but compared to more than 10 years ago, This proportion was very large. More than 10 years ago, the 6 major film companies basically scraped up all the box office revenue each year, leaving only a pitiful 1% for the small film companies. If the New Line wanted to enter the ranks of the giants and share more than 80% of the profits, before meeting Eric, there were only 2 paths to take. One was to concentrate all their strength on one throw, and take the risk of investing in the production of a big film. Only then could they achieve a big box office hit. However, this was extremely risky. If it failed, the New Line would only go bankrupt. The other was to slowly endure. Perhaps one day, a small production film that the company invested in would suddenly achieve a heaven-defying box office, quickly accumulating a huge amount of funds. In addition, the company's leaders had good foresight, and the subsequent films they invested in would also sell well, creating a virtuous cycle. Then they could quickly accumulate strength and one day enter the ranks of the major film companies. In the parallel universe, Lionsgate Pictures relied on luck to rise. Lionsgate was only established in 1997. In terms of qualifications and strength, it was originally far inferior to the veteran second-tier companies like New Line and Miramax Films. However, because of the low-budget documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11, released in 2004 under great pressure, it was lucky to earn $224 million at the global box office and quickly accumulated enough capital. Then, it used the capital to develop the super-hit Twilight series and the Hunger Games series. At one point, it trampled Universal and MGM under its feet in terms of box office results. It was closely followed by Warner Brothers, Disney, Columbia, and Fox, ranking 5th. And after Eric threw out his intention of acquisition, Robert Shaye saw another broad road. This road allowed New Line to steadily enter the ranks of the movie giants without taking risks or waiting for good luck to come. Eric's previous films all sold well, proving that he had the ability to do this. Since there was a giant like MGM, United Artists in the Big Six, there could certainly be another New Line, Firefly. Well, it was Firefly New Line. After drinking 1 or 2 cups of coffee, Robert Shaye did not have the patience to waste time with Eric. The young man in front of him had amazing patience. Although he was unwilling to admit it, Robert Shaye had to face the fact that he had lost in this confrontation. And if he did not bring up the main topic, perhaps Eric would really treat this meeting as a chat, and then get up to say goodbye. Then, the next time they meet may only be at the negotiating table. Eric, I heard that Firefly is preparing to expand their own distribution channels? Robert Shaye asked casually as he stirred the coffee that the waiter served. Eric's lips curled into a smile. Finally, he could not hold it in anymore. This meal had been going on for almost 2 hours. Eric almost lost his patience to continue wasting time with Robert Shaye. Jennifer Aniston had already floated over to him several times, hinting that he wanted to leave. Eric planned to finish the coffee in front of him. If Robert Shaye did not bring it up again, then he would leave immediately. All that was left was for Firefly to publicly and officially send out an acquisition invitation to New Line. The reason for this meal was that Eric wanted to sound out Robert Shaye and see if he was interested in selling the New Line. In his memory, Robert Shaye had a strong desire for control. In his previous life, although the New Line had been recruited by Warner Brothers, Robert Shaye still firmly held on to the control of the New Line. It seemed that almost 20 years later, Robert Shaye was forced to step down under pressure and helplessness when the Golden Compass suffered a huge loss. When Robert Shaye first brought up this topic and argued with Eric for a long time, it had already shown his attitude. So there was no need to discuss further. Even if they had reached a preliminary agreement, the specific terms and conditions still needed to be negotiated over a long period of time. Sony had spent more than half a year to acquire Columbia. Including the initial planning, it took at least a year. Firefly's acquisition of New Line was not that troublesome, but it would take at least 1 or 2 months. Chapter 170. Yes, Robert. That's why I invited you today, isn't it? Since the other party had spoken first, Eric quickly changed the topic. Robert Shaye laughed dryly to hide the awkwardness in his expression. In this secret confrontation, he had already decided to admit defeat, but he still had to beat around the bush. When Eric said this, He once again had the illusion that he was at a disadvantage. After taking a sip of the bitter coffee to calm himself down, Robert said, "All right, Eric. Actually, I'm also very interested in the cooperation between us. Can you tell me your conditions first?" "You know, Robert, what I value is the distribution channel of New Line. Therefore, I plan to fully acquire New Line. The initial price is $150 million US. Of course, this price can be further negotiated. Moreover, after the acquisition, I can also give you the position of CEO of Firefly after the integration. You're only 50 years old, you don't want to retire, right? I've been a boss for more than 20 years. Now that I've been reduced to an employee all of a sudden, even the CEO position isn't that attractive." Robert Shea smiled and spread out his hands. He continued, "Maybe we can merge, just like MGM United Artists. New Line has distribution channels, and Firefly has excellent movie content. If we merge, maybe in the next few years, there will be another movie giant called Firefly, New Line in Hollywood. What do you think? Then how do you think the shares should be distributed after the merger?" When Eric heard Robert Shea's words, he smiled in his heart. Firefly New Line, very interesting. However, Firefly was Firefly. He did not intend to be a tail behind them. The brand of New Line would definitely be retained, but it could only be a subsidiary of Firefly. Hearing this question, Robert Shea glanced at Eric, then picked up his coffee cup and thought for a moment. In fact, he had already been thinking about this question when he received Eric's invitation to dinner. Firefly had only been established for half a year and had zero distribution ability. The accumulation of the film library was also negligible. It was originally not worth much, but the reality was that Firefly's profitability was terrifying. Even if Home Alone was not considered a work of Firefly and could be excluded, Pretty Woman alone earned more than $100 million US in profit. If Dark War grossed $200 million US in the domestic box office, and the same $200 million US overseas box office, Firefly could earn at least $80 million US in the box office. Moreover, Robert Shea also learned that Eric would cooperate with Fox in 2 more movies and produce 3 more movies. Home Alone 2-inch was a guaranteed profit. Sleepless in Seattle was personally directed by Eric, and Tom Hanks would definitely not lose money. The other 3 movies were said to be low to medium investments that did not exceed $10 million US. With Eric's reputation, he would definitely make a small profit. So all these statistics, if Firefly's box office profits were calculated purely this year, it might be comparable to the box office profits of at least 2 movie giants combined, reaching an astonishing $400 million US. A company's market value is about 10 times the company's annual profits. For example, the Big Six, if the year is good, their annual profits will be about $200 million US, and their market value is about $2 billion US. Columbia's sudden increase in market value is exaggerated. Before Sony's acquisition, Columbia's market value is about $2 billion US. As for New Line, out of the 6 movies produced and released last year, only A Nightmare on Street 4 made a profit of more than $10 million US. The other movies only made a profit of a few million US. Including the profits from the videotapes and other peripheral products, New Line's profit last year was about $30 million US. In other words, New Line's market value was about $300 million US. Of course, this kind of calculation method only gave the layman a rough impression. In fact, the market value of a company definitely couldn't be calculated like that. New Line Entertainment had made a profit of $30 million US last year because of a good year. A Nightmare on Street 4 was also lucky enough to be a big hit. The second and third installments of A Nightmare on Street only made a little more than $20 million US at the box office. After the cost was deducted, the 2 installments didn't make much money. Therefore, in the information that Eric had obtained, a formal financial audit company only valued the New Line at $150 million, including the New Line's film library, film series rights, distribution channels, and other assets. The very unstable annual profits were only a small reference. But it is troublesome to calculate the value of Firefly. Eric had only spent less than $10 million US on renting office space and equipment. including the rights to Home Alone, Wind and Moon, half of the rights to Dark War, and a few other films. The total value of New Line's shares is about $100 million or $1 billion. Therefore, when Eric asked Robert how many shares he planned to get after the merger, Robert still couldn't give an answer even though he had been thinking about it for a few days. After thinking for a full 5 minutes, Robert brought the coffee cup to his mouth with his left hand. At the same time, he raised his right hand on the table and extended 3 fingers. 3%. Eric leaned forward and asked curiously. Robert Shea couldn't help but spit out his coffee. Fortunately, he turned his head in time and didn't spit it all over the table and Eric. However, because of the direction he turned his head, some water droplets splashed onto Jennifer Aniston's dress. Jennifer Aniston, who was a little absent-minded, didn't expect this to happen at all. She didn't even have time to dodge until she felt her dress get wet. She exclaimed and grabbed a napkin to wipe it. At the same time, she glared at Eric with dissatisfaction. She didn't know what exactly happened. She only knew that Eric said something like 3%, and then her dress got wet. The restaurant's service was very good. Seeing the situation, a waiter quickly handed her a napkin and helped clean the table and floor. A few waiters tidied everything up and quietly retreated to a spot not far away. "I'm so sorry." Robert Shea used a napkin to wipe his mouth and clothes and expressed his apology to Jennifer Aniston. Then he turned to Eric and said with a strong dissatisfaction, "Eric, is the company I've been working on for 20 years only worth 3% to you? If that's the case, what else do we have to talk about?" "Okay, I understand. You mean 30%? Eric confirmed again. Robert Shea nodded. "I've accumulated some wealth over the years, so I'm not inclined to buy it in cash. I hope the two companies can merge. Also, I want 30% of the shares. That's my bottom line." Chapter 171. 30% is definitely impossible. Eric leaned forward slightly, stared at Robert Shea, and shook his head gently. Without waiting for Robert Shea to refute, Eric continued, "If I have to give up 30% of the shares just to acquire a distribution company, then I don't have to do it at all. It's not worth it for Firefly. I can use this share to cooperate with several major film companies. With Firefly's current momentum, I believe that none of the current 7 major film companies will refuse to cooperate with me. I can even use this 30% of the shares to exchange for 10% of the shares from the weakest of the 7 major film companies, MGM." After Eric finished speaking, Robert Shea immediately retorted, "But in fact, Eric, you won't do that. Once Firefly becomes a subsidiary of the film giants, it will basically lose the possibility of developing into a film company that is on par with the other film giants. Controlling second and third-tier companies through acquisition to prevent them from developing to a certain scale and threatening their position is already a trick that these big companies are used to. I've been in Hollywood for more than 20 years and have seen too many of these things. Of course I won't do that. I'm just talking about a possibility. If I have to give up 30% of the shares, then I'd rather exchange shares with the film giants. So I have my bottom line too. Robert, I'll give you 10% of the shares at most. Of course, that's not all. I can compensate you with some cash." Eric also offered his own price. 10%. This was also a concession that he had made after thinking for a long time. He felt that this was already a lot. Firefly would definitely bring in more partners in the future. 10% is too little. Robert Shea said, "The new line has been developing in my hands for more than 20 years. It's like my child. If it's merged with your Firefly, I think 30% is not a lot at all. I'll never agree to anything less than that." Eric almost laughed out loud. Thunderbolt was established even earlier and is now gone. United Artists was also established very early. Unfortunately, it has also become a subsidiary of MGM. Robert, time doesn't tell you much. In 1981, United Artists was merged into Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer because of the huge loss of Heaven's Gate. Hollywood was left with only Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Fox. But now, ever since Michael Eisner took over Disney in 1984, In just 5 short years, 6 big studios have become 7 big studios. Robert Shea's face was a little red. Eric's words seemed to be comparing him to Michael Eisner. Although he admitted in his heart that he was not as capable as Michael Eisner, he still felt a little embarrassed when a guy 30 years younger than him said that to his face. In a hurry, he blurted out, "Whatever you say, Eric. Anyway, I insist on 30% of the shares." Eric saw that Robert Shea was a little anxious and quickly comforted him. "How about this, Robert? Since both of us have such intentions, let's discuss it in detail." "No need." Robert Shea refused. "If you don't agree, we don't have to talk about any specific cooperation." Eric was a little irritated. His fingers tapped on the table a few times out of habit. Because of the tablecloth, it did not make the usual soft sound. "Robert, you have to understand that we don't have much time left." Robert Shea was slightly curious when he heard Eric's inexplicable words. However, he was afraid that he would weaken his momentum if he suddenly opened his mouth, so he held back and did not ask. Eric did not beat around the bush. He continued, "Because of the vigorous development of videotapes, cable television, and other peripheral channels, movies have walked out of the small circle that could only make profits through the cinema more than a decade ago. This has also made movies more and more important in the media industry. I believe that in the next 10 years, most of the Hollywood giants will be acquired by the media groups and become part of their huge industrial chain. Once this trend is formed, with the support of the media group's huge media resources and financial resources, not only will the major Hollywood film companies no longer have to worry about falling into bankruptcy due to investment failures, but they will also be able to completely consolidate their position with the advantage of huge media resources. When that time comes, if the second and third-tier film companies don't have heaven-defying luck, it will be difficult for them to shake the position of the major film companies backed by the media giants. Their fate is either to be acquired by the major film companies and, as you just said, completely lose the opportunity to become a giant, or they can only silently fish for some leftovers from the market after the major film companies divide it up. Robert Shea suppressed the shock in his heart and did not show it on his face. He retorted, "Even if what you said makes some sense, it will definitely take many years. I believe there is still a chance for a new line, as long as—" "No, you don't have a chance," Eric firmly interrupted Robert Shea. "In fact, this trend has already started since News Corporation acquired 20th Century Fox a few years ago. This year, Sony acquired Columbia, and 2 of the top 7 are gone. Moreover, I also read in the newspaper that Warner intends to cooperate with Turner Broadcasting, which has its own independent television network, to form a media group. Once this becomes a reality, 3 of the top 7 will be gone. How long do you think the remaining 4 film companies can last?" Robert Shea was silent. Eric did not stop persuading. He continued, "Robert, this is the last chance for second and third-tier film companies like us to rise up. We have no more than 10 years, or even only 5 years. Once the industry map is completed, even if, as you said, you can still rely on luck and a long period of accumulation to make the new line into a first-tier one and surpass the old giants in profits, then you are destined to only be a second-tier film company. That's because the movie giants have already merged with the media group. It's impossible for a pure film company to compete with them." Speaking of this, Eric thought of Lionsgate Films in his previous life. Lionsgate had surpassed the 2 established film companies in terms of profits with the 2 series, The Hunger Games and Twilight. However, at that time, the remaining 6 major film companies had already merged with the media group. Lionsgate was only an independent film company. In terms of overall strength, it was still far from being able to compete with the 2 giants. "What you said is all just a hypothesis, isn't it?" Robert Shea could not help but refute. Eric could see that Robert Shea was completely convinced. His tone also softened. "Robert, although it's just a hypothesis, with your more than 20 years of experience in Hollywood, you should be able to distinguish the possibility of such a hypothesis, right?" Robert Shea lowered his head and looked at the cup of coffee in front of him, which was almost empty. "But 10% is still too little. Michael Eisner now owns less than 10% of Disney's shares. His net worth is not much higher than yours, but in Hollywood, He is ranked in the top 3. He is envied and looked up to by more than 90% of the people in Hollywood. Robert, didn't you also say that money doesn't mean much to us? Think about it. After Firefly acquires the new line, you can become Firefly CEO. I believe you don't doubt the profitability of the movies I produce. I believe that in a few years, we will be able to join the ranks of the movie giants. At that time, we will definitely have time to occupy our own place in the future integration of the media group. At that time, the 10% of shares you own may be worth more than $1 billion. If you continue to operate the new line alone, how long will it take for the new line to reach a market value of more than $1 billion? 20%, Eric, 20%, no less. Robert Shea was completely moved by the prospects described by Eric and took the initiative to make a big concession. The corner of Eric's mouth revealed an imperceptible smile. Since Robert Shea was no longer stubbornly insisting on the so-called 30% bottom line, then they could continue the discussion. So he snapped his fingers to call the waiter over and handed over his credit card to settle the bill. Then he said to Robert Shea, "Robert, we definitely won't be able to come to any conclusion now, and it's a little late. So let's choose a more formal venue for the specific discussion." Robert Shea regretted saying that he would concede 20%. He realized that he had been fooled by a young man who was dozens of years younger than him. He wanted to slap himself in the face. Although he had decided to concede in his heart, it was too inappropriate to say it out loud at this time. It seemed that he had made several mistakes tonight. This made Robert Shea not dare to underestimate Eric anymore. At the same time, he also made up his mind not to confront Eric directly during the formal negotiation. Perhaps it would be good to find an agent who was good at negotiation. Seeing that Eric did not take the opportunity to continue to push the price down, he quickly nodded and said, "Okay, it's really late. I should go back." After the few of them said their goodbyes at the entrance of the restaurant, Jennifer Aniston, who was originally quiet, suddenly hugged Eric's arm and stood on her tiptoes as she smiled and said, "Wow, Eric, you were so cool just now. Robert was stunned by your aura, hee." Eric reached out his other hand to tuck the girl's long hair that had fallen over her forehead. He smiled and said, "What about you? Did you suddenly have the urge to kneel down and kiss my shoes?" Chapter 172. Jennifer Aniston originally felt a little warm as Eric combed her hair. Hearing this, she immediately pouted and said, "Ah no, I think you're just spouting nonsense to deceive me. Anyway, I didn't understand much of it. What resources, mergers and acquisitions, territories, it's all a mess." Eric pretended to be sad and covered his chest. "You really hurt my self-esteem. It seems that I'll have to teach you a lesson later." And Jennifer Aniston lowered her head and blushed. Suddenly, she raised her head and said, "Don't do that again, or I won't let you off." "And what do you mean?" Eric was confused for a moment. "You did it on purpose." Jennifer Aniston stomped her feet and thought that Eric was pretending to be stupid. She angrily let go of Eric's arm and walked a few steps forward. Eric chuckled and caught up with her in a few steps. He hugged her waist and said, "Okay, don't be angry. I really didn't think of it just now." "Ah." Jennifer Aniston thought of something and jumped away like a frightened rabbit. She glanced around and found that there were no pedestrians. She was relieved and glared at Eric. Eric smiled and walked forward again. He reached out and hugged Jennifer Aniston in his arms and whispered something. "Oomph." Jennifer Aniston heard Eric's words and struggled. She wanted to get out of Eric's arms again, but she didn't succeed. The doorman quickly drove Eric's car over. After handing over the tip, Eric and Jennifer Aniston got into the car. "Are you going to my place?" Jennifer Aniston asked in a low voice after Eric started the car. "Of course." Eric turned the steering wheel and drove the car onto the road. Thinking of the scene a few months ago, he couldn't help but smile and said, "Drew must have gone back by now. Or do you want to go to my place again and spar with this girl?" "Umph." Jennifer Aniston angrily turned her head away. After a while, she suddenly thought of something and turned around. "Eric, how's your house in Malibu coming along? Including the renovation, it will take another 2 or 3 months. But it will be good enough if we can move in by the end of the year. Maybe during Christmas, we can have a party in the seaside villa. Eric replied as he stared at the road ahead. Malibu had been under construction for more than half a year. However, the construction efficiency of the Americans was so low that it made one's hair stand on end. It was far less efficient than the 10-story buildings that Eric had seen in his previous life. However, if it really took only 10 days to build a mansion, Eric wouldn't dare to live in it. In the beginning, Eric would take the initiative to ask Frank Gehry about the progress of the project. But after 2 or 3 months, Eric didn't have much interest in asking. He just received the progress report from Frank Gehry's office on a regular basis. At the same time, he could only comfort himself with the excuse that the work was done slowly. After hearing Eric's answer, Jennifer Aniston asked in a low voice, "Then, when the time comes, will Drew still move in?" Eric's thumb slid on the steering wheel twice before he said, "You know, Jenny, Drew is only 14 years old. She's still a child. Whether it's legally or emotionally, I can't let her live outside alone now. She has to at least wait until she's 16 years old, before she can move out." Jennifer Aniston wrinkled her little nose and snorted unwillingly. "She doesn't look like a little girl at all." She really doesn't look like one. But many things are like this. Drew is considered a public figure. Those so-called child protection organizations will always pay more attention to her. If I let her move out now, it will definitely cause dissatisfaction among those people. Why didn't that little girl be born in the slums? Then no one would care about these things. Yeah. Eric sighed. The world is so unfair. Generally speaking, the United States is still a world of elites. The education system is also an elite education system. This country can only ensure the excellence of the people at the top. As for the children at the bottom of society, who cares? Even if they drop out of school at the age of 11 or 12 and have children at the age of 13 or 14, very few people care about them. Drew is different. She has already climbed to the top of the pyramid. She is destined to enjoy the benefits that the elites at the top can enjoy. The attention of the child protection organizations is also a kind of benefit. Jennifer Aniston leaned on the car window with one hand and curled her lips at Eric. "Well, congratulations on succeeding again. You always have a million ways to change the topic." Don't think that I didn't notice. I just couldn't be bothered to pester you. This time, you were the one who changed the topic first." Eric laughed. "It was you. Okay, it was me." Eric did not intend to argue with Jennifer Aniston. He continued, "The house in Malibu is very big. Jenny, you can move there when the time comes. It's either me or her. It's up to you." Eric patted the steering wheel lightly. "Then forget it." "Ugh. You bastard, you are always so biased." Jennifer Aniston stared at Eric with her eyes wide open. Her gaze drifted around as if she was looking for a place to bite. Eric glanced at Jennifer Aniston's expression and quickly warned, "Hey, don't mess around. I'm driving." As he spoke, Eric suddenly heard the Motorola mobile phone ring. He quickly stopped the car by the side of the road and picked up the phone. Drew's excited voice came from the phone. Eric glanced at Jennifer Aniston next to him and quickly opened the door to get out of the car. He ran to the street lamp and continued speaking. Jennifer Aniston looked at Eric's careful expression. She was angry and a little. Well, he still cared about her feelings. Jennifer Aniston comforted herself. After a while, Eric returned to the car, closed the door, and started the car. "What's the matter?" Jennifer Aniston could not help but ask after driving for a while. Eric shook his head. "I don't know. The little girl was acting weird and insisted that I go back. She said that she had some good news to tell me." "Forget it, ignore her. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I'll go to your place first." "Well." Jennifer Aniston pinched the corner of her skirt. After a while she said, Why don't you go back and take a look? Maybe there is something important?" Chapter 173. Eric pushed the door and walked into the living room. Drew, who heard the sound, immediately jumped up from the sofa and rushed into Eric's arms with an excited face. However, after sniffling twice, Her originally smiling expression suddenly became unhappy. Eric dodged speechlessly. The little girl huffed on Eric's left cheek in disgust, wiped it with her sleeve, and kissed him. Eric was amused by the little girl's behavior. He took 2 steps forward, pulled the little girl who was coiled around his waist, and threw her on the sofa. He sat down and asked, "Okay, why did you call me back in a hurry?" As Eric said, he had noticed the eye-catching black folder on the coffee table in front of him. He picked it up and opened it. A copyright transfer contract appeared in front of Eric. "Oh, the copyright of Golden Jade League. Your action is quite fast. I thought it would be good if you could get it after the summer vacation." Drew lay on Eric with a smile, and her chin hung on one of Eric's shoulders. This is Hollywood. As long as there is money, many things are much easier to do. "How much did you spend?" Eric took the contract from the metal clip of the folder and asked casually. $5 million. The little girl said the price without confidence, but she quickly explained, "But it's the full copyright. It's permanent. Even some of the original music copyrights in it belong to us." Eric nodded. If it was really as Drew said, then the price was still acceptable. It could be used to enrich the Firefly library. Besides, after Sleepless in Seattle became popular, maybe he could invest in a remake of this movie. Although Eric originally only asked Drew to get the copyright of the movie for 5 years, he could also imagine that the company who owned the copyright finally met a fat sheep who was interested in this 30-year-old movie. They would definitely want to make a big profit. 5 years. Not for sale. If you want to buy it, you can take it all. It's just that it's a little expensive. Seeing Eric nod, Drew breathed a sigh of relief and began to explain. This movie was originally produced by a company set up by an investor named Jerry Ward, but that guy was unlucky. He set up a film company and made a few good movies, but a few years later, he died of a heart attack. The copyright of his film company's movies was sold by his widow to another film company. Later, that film company went bankrupt, and after a few rounds, it fell into the hands of Fox. Wow. When Eric saw the name 20th Century Fox in the document and heard the girl's explanation, he almost jumped up. Drew was talking enthusiastically when he was startled by Eric's sudden voice. He widened his eyes and asked, "What? What's wrong? Is there something wrong? You're saying this movie was bought from 20th Century Fox?" Eric asked again, hoping for a fluke. The girl's eyelashes blinked innocently twice, and she nodded her chin. "Yeah." Eric smiled bitterly. "This is bad. Fox will definitely hate me in the future." That night, he was pestered by the little girl, so Eric found a summer part-time job for the girl at the last minute. He did not consider the ownership of the copyright of Golden Jade League at all. If it was Warner, Universal, or Paramount that had nothing to do with him, Eric would not have any cooperation with them. Movies were also a business. If they made money, they should celebrate. If they were cheated, they should accept it. However, he did not expect that the copyright of Golden Jade League was actually in the hands of 20th Century Fox. His cooperation with Fox was still in the honeymoon period. He did not want to strain the relationship between the two sides. Therefore, when Columbia wanted Dark War, Eric explained to Barry Diller face-to-face and made a TV series compensation. However, the reality was always easy to joke with people. God really did not want him to maintain a good relationship with Fox. If after Sleepless in Seattle was released, the videotape of Golden Jade League sold 2 million copies as the friend said in his previous life, that would be $60 million in sales, which was equivalent to a blockbuster movie. Although the film company always claimed that the profit of the videotape was less than 20%, and the remaining 80% was the cost, as long as one understood a little, they would know that this was nonsense. The profit margin of the videotape could easily exceed 50%, which was higher than the box office profit. Then, with the videotape of Golden Jade League, Eric could earn at least $30 million from this business. Eric could almost imagine the appearance of some people who were furious because of this deal. Drew saw Eric's constantly changing face and asked curiously, "How is it possible? We paid $5 million. Fox made money. How can they hate us?" "Yes, but although we spent more than $3 million, If we earn 30 million US dollars with this movie in less than a year, what do you think Fox will think? The girl covered her small mouth in surprise. Eric asked her to get the copyright of this movie, saying that she could make a lot of money. Drew thought that it was only 1 or 2 million US dollars, so when she just said the price of 5 million US dollars, the girl was a little nervous. If she could really make 30 million US dollars. But, it seems, Eric, the people of Fox don't know that we bought it. I was afraid that if I showed up directly, people would associate it with you, so I specially found an agent. After he got the copyright, he transferred it to me. From beginning to end, Fox didn't know that we were going to buy the copyright of this movie, Drew said, and her voice was getting lower and lower. She quickly thought that if this movie made a lot of money with the influence of Sleepless in Seattle in the future, as long as the people of Fox didn't have a problem with their IQ, they would definitely associate it with Eric. Thinking of this, the girl stuck out her tongue. Then Eric, what should we do now? Eric rubbed his temple and thought for a moment. Sleepless in Seattle was released at the end of the year, so the videotape of Golden Jade League would definitely create a sales miracle next year. At that time, his contract with Fox for this year would have been fulfilled, so he didn't have to worry that Fox would obstruct the release of the movie. At most, when the profit sharing was in the future, Fox would play some tricks and delay it. However, Eric was not worried because the terms of the contracts signed last year were very detailed. Once Fox breached the contract, there was no possibility of winning in court. Eric was not like those filmmakers in his previous life who found that the profit-sharing contract signed with the movie company was not detailed enough after the movie sold well, causing disputes that lasted for several years. Forget it, that's it. We can't spit out the meat that is in our mouth. Anyway, Fox voluntarily sold it, and we also offered such a high price. The girl also hugged Eric and rubbed against him like a spoiled child. However, Eric, there is a small matter. Chapter 174. Just a small matter? Eric pulled the girl in front of him and placed her on his lap. He gently pinched her pretty face. Did you get into trouble? How could that be? I wouldn't get into trouble, Drew immediately denied. It's like this. In order to buy the copyright of this movie, I found an agent. Oh. Eric immediately understood. You promised the other party benefits, but you don't have the ability to fulfill them. Moreover, this benefit must be related to me, right? Eric, you're so smart. The girl curled up in Eric's arms and looked up at him with admiration. Okay, stop pretending. Tell me the truth. Eric couldn't help but knock on the girl's head. This caused another round of struggle and protest. Actually, it's nothing. The girl first gave Eric a heads up before saying, when I was looking for an agent, a guy named Lawrence Band happened to come to me with his friends at a party. He was holding a script and wanted me to pass it to you. They hope you can invest. They couldn't contact me, so it's understandable that they came to you. However, why would they want me to invest? There are so many movie companies. Their first choice should be the big 7 movie companies. Even if it's not the big 7, the other second and third tier movie companies should be their first choice, right? Drew hugged Eric's neck and smiled. Because you're rich. The newspapers are full of news that you got hundreds of millions of US dollars. Eric shrugged. You should know that I don't have much money left from Home Alone. Even if I get my share from Wind and Moon, I'll have to spend it quickly if I want to acquire a film company and set up a distribution channel. I can't spend my share from Dark Battle anymore. I have to save it for next year's tax. I have to pay 35% income tax. Calculating it this way, I don't have much cash left. I just realized that I've been busy for nothing since last year. I haven't saved any money. The girl mischievously patted his shoulder. Don't worry, Mr. Billionaire. If you don't have money, I'll take care of you. If only a woman had said that to me in my previous life. Eric smiled and sighed. All right, let's continue. What's that guy's name again? Lawrence Band. I think the reason why he wants you to invest in his movie is that they are both too young. Even if the script is good, those movie companies will not trust him and his friend to produce the movie. After all, as long as it is a proper movie, no matter how small the investment is, It will cost at least $1 million. So you understand. Then you agreed and asked him to be your agent. Is he capable of being your agent? Eric thought of another question. That guy is very smart. He even opened a film company with his friend. You know, it's the kind of shell company that you apply for with a registration fee. There's nothing. There are many film companies like that in Hollywood. But the year before last, they produced a very low-budget movie. He personally acted as the producer, and his friend acted as the director and scriptwriter. But after the production was completed, the negative film was burned in a fire. They lost a lot of money. It's a pity. Lawrence Band, right? Oh wait, Lawrence Band? Eric suddenly raised his voice. Drew nodded. She did not understand. Eric put the girl down from his lap and pointed to the coffee table. Can you spell his name for me? Although Drew was a little confused, she obediently walked to the coffee table and dipped her hand into the teacup. After thinking for a while, she hesitantly wrote 2 words on the coffee table. It should be spelled like this, right? After writing, the girl turned her head and asked Eric with uncertainty. Eric rubbed his forehead and changed the subtitle of Lawrence to W. At the same time, he knocked on the head of the girl who was pretending to be cute. I really want to know what you've been doing in school. You don't even know how to spell such a simple name. Oh, speaking of which, I spent so much money to send you to boarding school, but I've never seen your report card. Let me see it next time. Hee, I don't think that's necessary. The girl grinned and put her hands on the coffee table. She looked like she was ready to run away at any time. Eric did not pursue the matter. He looked at the name on the coffee table. It was exactly the same as the name in his memory. The reason why Eric did not react when Drew mentioned it was mainly because when he read English names in his previous life, it was usually translated into Chinese. In addition, Drew's accent was completely different from the English he learned in his previous life. Eric did not associate the name with the name in his memory. Drew, what's the name of Lawrence Band's friend? Eric asked again. The girl scratched her head and thought for a while. I think it's, maybe, Quentin Tarantino. After saying that, Drew saw Eric's expression change. She asked, Eric, do you know them? Eric calmed himself down so that the girl wouldn't notice any more abnormalities. He quickly thought of an excuse and nodded. I've heard of it. When you said the name just now, I had a feeling of déjà vu. It's like when I was talking to someone about geniuses, I heard it as an interesting story. It's these 2 unlucky fellows who filmed a movie together. In the end, when the filming was completed, the negative film was burned. Eric did not mention who he was chatting with, and his description was very vague. Therefore, Lily did not have to go back and find someone to verify it. However, Drew obviously did not suspect anything. She believed Eric's explanation. So, you're saying that they want me to invest in their movie and left you the script? Eric asked. Drew shook her head. No, I didn't ask for it. I wanted to tell you about it first. If you don't agree, I'll just send them away casually. That's not good. Since you've already made a promise, you can't be so polite. We'll definitely expand our production business in the future. Although they're just 2 small characters, if word of you dealing with them spreads, it will definitely have some impact. Eric sat back on the sofa again. He thought for a while and said, Let's do it tomorrow. Tomorrow afternoon, bring them to the set of Friends. There's an hour lunch break between filming at noon. Ask them to bring the script. I'll take a look at it. Eric, isn't this too troublesome? Why do you want to meet them? I think it's a waste of time. That Quentin Tarantino is only in his 20s. What kind of good script can he write? All the famous screenwriters in Hollywood are in their 30s or 40s. If it really doesn't work, I'll just ask for the script for you to take a look. There's no need to meet them, right? Eric smiled and said, Have you forgotten that I'm not even 20 yet? I think you're at least 40 years old. The girl leaned over to Eric and said, This intuition is too accurate. Eric touched the girl's hair, but he soon felt relieved. With the girl's shrewd personality, it was not surprising that she found out about his mental age after getting along with him day and night. In fact, many people found out about it. Okay, it's settled then. Bring them over tomorrow, But don't be late. You know I'm very busy. Drew responded. She quickly rubbed against Eric like a spoiled child. Eric, after I finish this matter, is there a reward? Eric patted the girl's back and said, Yes, I helped you set up a film company, but you're still underage, so it's temporarily under my name. When you're 18, I'll transfer it to you. As for the copyright of Golden Jade League, put it under this company's name. Wow, tell me what's the name? The girl's eyes were sparkling as she asked excitedly. Flower Films. The girl was stunned for a moment. Then she pouted and said, Flower Films. What a rustic name. Can you change it? Rustic? Eric stared at the girl's pretty face. This is the name you came up with in the previous life. How is it rustic? Tell me one. Drew tilted her head and thought for a while before raising her head in frustration. The girl obviously had no talent in naming. Then let's start with Flower Films. Eric smiled and rubbed the girl's head. Okay, it's so late. Go to sleep. The girl grabbed Eric's arm to stop him from standing up. No. Don't worry, Eric. There's still a month before the summer vacation. Can you give me something earlier? For example, buy a movie copyright or something. And let me think about it. I'll make a list for you tomorrow. Now go to sleep early, Eric said. Don't patronize me. I want it tomorrow. The girl didn't give up. No problem. I'll definitely give it to you tomorrow. After Eric finished speaking, he got up and walked to the stairs. He didn't go directly to the bedroom but walked into the study. Seeing the girl follow up, Eric said, Don't disturb me. You go to sleep first. If you always stay up late, be careful that you become ugly before you're 30 years old. The girl frowned and walked to the bedroom reluctantly. Eric found a notebook on the left side of the desk and opened it in front of him. He picked up a fountain pen and thought about what had just happened. A smile appeared on his face. He didn't expect Quentin Tarantino, who was known as a genius director in the previous life, to take the initiative to approach him. Although Lawrence Band wasn't as famous as Quentin, the two were actually old partners. Lawrence Band was the producer of all of Quentin's movies. However, since his butterfly effect had attracted two guys who would only become famous 2 years later, he didn't know if the famous Drowning Dog and Pulp Fiction from his previous life would appear again. After all, the influence of the butterfly effect was too great. Perhaps Quentin had missed the opportunity to create these two movies because of a momentary lapse in judgment. At the same time, Eric was very curious about what script Quentin would come up with tomorrow. Chapter 175. At the entrance of the Fox set, the tall black security guard glanced at the two men standing not far from the gate from time to time. The two men hiding in the shade of the tree were both over 6 feet tall. Although they were dressed properly, the younger man with a wide forehead, big chin, and furrowed eyebrows didn't look like a good person. In addition, only the older man was carrying a backpack and didn't have a camera, so he didn't look like a paparazzi. Therefore, the black security guard secretly increased his vigilance. At the same time, he informed his companions to prevent the two men from sneaking in when they weren't paying attention. This kind of thing rarely happened, but it wasn't unheard of. There were often big stars filming on the set. Once someone sneaked in and harassed them, the security guards on duty could only pack up and leave, regardless of whether they caused any damage. However, the two men had been well behaved and didn't do anything inappropriate, so the security guards didn't find any reason to chase them away. The two men were waiting there before 10 o'clock and didn't leave until almost 12. They glanced at the gate and the road next to the set from time to time, as if waiting for someone. At about 11:50, a yellow taxi stopped near the entrance of the set. The door opened, and a petite girl with fair skin wearing a pink t-shirt, denim shorts, and heart-shaped sunglasses got out of the car. She was carrying a small canvas bag and holding a parasol in her hand. When the two men saw the girl, they quickly went up to her. As they talked, the slightly older man even grabbed the girl's parasol and held it for her. Only then did the three of them walk towards the entrance. The black security guard looked at the girl with milk-white skin and sunglasses who gradually walked in, and felt a sense of déjà vu. It wasn't until the three of them came to the side of the car door that he stopped them. Sorry, 3 of you. Please show me your passes. The 2 men looked at Drew, and the girl took off her sunglasses. I'm here to see Eric Williams. Sir, do you think I can go in directly? You're Miss Drew Barrymore. Drew took off her sunglasses, and the black security guard recognized her at a glance. He relaxed his vigilance and smiled politely at Drew, revealing his white teeth. Of course, but according to the rules, you can't go in directly without a pass. Miss Barrymore, can you wait a moment? I'll call the studio where Mr. Williams is, and ask them to send someone to pick you up. Thank you, Mr. Crick. Drew glanced at his work pass and said. It was noon in August and the sun was blazing in Los Angeles. The temperature was over 30 degrees, so the black security guard let Drew and the other 2 into the lounge next to the gate before he made a phone call. The girl walked into the lounge and found a chair to sit down. She took out some chewing gum from her bag and stuffed it into her mouth. Then, she took out a makeup mirror and tidied her hair. She smiled at the 2 men who were standing next to her and couldn't find a place to sit. Lawrence, have you been waiting for a long time? Of course not, Drew. We just came half an hour earlier than you, Lawrence Band said with a smile. The black security guard who was on the phone just glanced at Lawrence Band when he heard him say that. He didn't intend to expose him. The girl looked at the 2 men whose shirts were soaked in sweat and didn't ask any more questions. She shrugged her small shoulders. She told them to come back after 11 o'clock, but it seemed that they came quite early. Perhaps they were afraid of being delayed by traffic on the way. Anyway, the girl didn't care much about this kind of thing. Quentin Tarantino, who was standing next to Lawrence Band, didn't say anything. It wasn't that he was shy, and of course, it wasn't that he was afraid of strangers. In comparison, he was actually more talkative than Lawrence Band. It was just that this gentleman kept sneaking glances at the little feet that were exposed in the girl's sandals from time to time. He felt a little uncomfortable. The delicate little feet were exquisite like a pair of works of art. But why did she dye her nails black? Why did she dye them black? Quentin felt like his heart was being scratched by something. He even had the urge to rush up and wipe off the black nail polish. Of course, he definitely couldn't do it in reality. Drew chatted with Lawrence Band for a while before turning to Quentin. Coincidentally, she caught Quentin peeking at her feet. The girl was not angry. Instead, she smiled at Quentin with a cheeky look, as if she had caught Quentin looking at her feet. Quentin quickly looked away awkwardly. At the same time, he covered his mouth and coughed twice, trying to ease the awkwardness. The girl didn't want to let him go. She raised her feet and looked at them. Then she asked directly, Quentin, is there anything wrong with my feet? A cough cough, no, of course not. Miss Barrymore, your feet are very, very beautiful, Quentin replied incoherently. He immediately felt Lawrence's elbow on his waist. He immediately reacted. No, I mean, hee. Seeing the flustered look on the other party's face, the lass laughed heartily. Lawrence Band also looked at his best friend speechlessly. What kind of time is this? If the girl in front of me is petty, this opportunity that we worked so hard to get will be ruined. Fortunately, the staff who came to greet Drew and the other 2 at the set resolved Quentin's awkwardness. The 3 of them took an electric scooter to the studio of Friends together. When they walked into the studio, Drew went straight to Eric. Lawrence Band and Quentin Tarantino also quickly followed. Soon, they saw Drew pouncing on a young man in a blue t-shirt. Eric hugged Drew and helplessly allowed the girl to rub her face against him. Then he let go of the girl and walked to Lawrence Band and Quentin Tarantino. Hello, Mr. Tarantino, Mr. Band. Eric shook hands with the 2 of them. Quentin originally thought that Eric would greet Lawrence first. After all, the 2 of them did seem to be led by Lawrence. However, Eric actually walked to him first. This made Quentin suddenly feel flattered. Although Quentin had always been a narcissistic guy in the comments of his friends, narcissism definitely depended on the occasion. Facing a director who had achieved more than $1 billion in global box office sales before the new year, Quentin naturally felt inferior. Chapter 176. Hello, Mr. Williams. I like your movie Dark War very much. Not only is the plot great, but the soundtrack is also very good, especially the silent love part during the encounter on the bus. I heard that you personally wrote this song. That's really amazing. Eric's amiable appearance made Quentin start a conversation very quickly. He directly talked about Eric's movie Dark War, that was still in theaters. Although he admired Eric's achievements in movies, he didn't feel much about Eric's previous movies, except for the unique style of Dark War. Eric smiled modestly. Actually, the composer also put in a lot of effort. I just provided some inspiration. No, you can't say that. For music, inspiration is the most important thing. Quentin immediately retorted. Lawrence's band next to them was a little anxious. He knew that the meeting was only for an hour. Looking at the staff around him, he knew that they could start work at any time. In this case, although talking about music could make them feel closer, he couldn't waste too much time. However, he didn't dare to interrupt the conversation between the two. He could only give Quentin a slight look. Eric saw that Lawrence's band was a little anxious, so he didn't talk much with Quentin. He said directly, "Let's go to the lounge and have a working meal together. You guys haven't eaten yet." "Of course, thank you, Mr. Williams. Just call me Eric," Eric replied. He glanced not far away. "Please wait a moment." After that, he quickly walked towards Drew and Jennifer Aniston. The two treasures seemed to be quarreling again. If they fought here, it would be a big deal. "Hey Drew, Jenny, what are you talking about?" After approaching, Eric looked at the two girls who were staring at each other, and seemed ready to fight at any time. When the little girl saw Eric walk in, she immediately gave up her confrontation with Jennifer Aniston, and ran over. She hugged Eric's arm and complained. "She started it first, Eric. I just said hello to her, and then she got angry. She's so petty." "It's you." Jennifer Aniston revealed an aggrieved and angry expression as she glared at Eric. That's right. She was glaring at Eric instead of at Drew. This made Eric somewhat baffled, so he could only ask, "Girl, how did you greet Jenny?" Drew shrugged as if he didn't see Jennifer Aniston's angry look. "It's nothing. She came out of the room, and I just went up to pat her. Then she got anxious." The corner of Eric's mouth twitched. He didn't need to look at the little flame in Jennifer Aniston's eyes to understand why she was angry. The little girl's words were completely unintentional. She was probably just teasing Jennifer Aniston about gaining weight again. However, it hit the nail on the head. She probably thought that he told Drew about that embarrassing incident, and that was why Drew teased her this time. Thinking of this, Eric let go of the little girl, and went up to hug Jennifer Aniston. He explained in Jennifer Aniston's ear, "All right, Jenny, Drew definitely didn't mean it. Don't lower yourself to her level." "You promise?" Jennifer Aniston blinked. Eric patted Jennifer Aniston's back. "I swear, that. How is that possible? Am I right?" After Jennifer Aniston understood that it was all a coincidence, she pushed Eric away. "The two guests are still waiting. You go deal with them. I'm going to eat." "I'm going to eat too. I wonder how the lunch here is." The little girl's big eyes rolled and she turned to leave. "This is the set. You two must not make a scene. Be good," Eric said worriedly. You don't have to tell me that." The two girls didn't even turn their heads as they spoke and left separately. Seeing that the two girls went in different directions, Eric was relieved and went to the lounge with Lawrence's band and Quentin Tarantino. At the same time, he asked his assistant to send 3 sets of lunch. "Drew has already told me everything. So can I take a look at the script first?" Eric said after they sat down at a simple table in the lounge. Of course, Lawrence's band took out a thick script from his bag and pushed it in front of Eric. Eric glanced at the name of the script. It was neither Drowning Dog nor Pulp Fiction. It was called Rainbow Robbers. When he saw the name, Eric couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. He then quietly opened the script. Based on the name of the script, Eric already knew that there were many similarities between the script and Drowning Dog. The Rainbow Robbers was vaguely similar to the 6 robbers who used 6 colors as code names to rob the jewelry store in Drowning Dog in his previous life. Eric also understood the situation. Many scriptwriters actually had certain ideas in mind for several years before they wrote a script. However, scripts written at different times would definitely be very different. Ordinary people would not be able to understand this difference. However, as a transmigrator, Eric was lucky enough to encounter this kind of situation. It was quite interesting to think about it. The assistant quickly brought 3 sets of lunch and a few bottles of water. "Quentin, Lawrence, you two eat first. Don't worry about me," Eric said as he looked up at the two who were staring at him hopefully. "Of course, thank you." Quentin and Lawrence quickly grabbed their cutlery, opened their lunches, and ate a few mouthfuls. However, under such circumstances, neither of them had much of an appetite. Instead, they were like students waiting for the results of an exam. When Eric lowered his head and continued to read the script, the two of them slowly stopped eating. Eric also noticed their actions and did not continue to persuade them. Instead, he turned another page of the script. The plot of Rainbow Robber was not much different from Drowning Dog in his previous life. It was still the story of a gang leader gathering a few strangers to rob a jewelry store and being ambushed by the police. However, from the name, it could be seen that the 6 robbers in his previous life had become 7. As for the plot, Quentin's talkative style was unabashedly displayed from the beginning of the script. Right after that was the part where the robbery failed, and the 2 robbers fled to the rendezvous point in a car. Of course, in this script, Quentin was still the same as in his previous life. He imitated a few scenes from the Hong Kong film Dragon and Tiger. Eric recalled a rumor from his previous life that Quentin had specially gone to Hong Kong to explain this matter to the director of Dragon and Tiger. However, in Eric's opinion, this was completely a report by the tabloids to make themselves look good. Because he had the original version in his mind as a comparison. Eric only spent 20 minutes or so to finish reading the script that was close to 100 pages long. After putting down the script, Eric looked at the nervous faces of the two and nodded. "Not bad, let's eat first." Quentin and Lawrence sighed in relief at the same time. Since Eric said so, then the possibility of investing in this movie was very high. In order to increase the chances of success, Lawrence specifically listed the budget of the movie at the back of the script. It was about $1 million. The two of them believed that their unique style of movie should be able to attract Eric's interest. With a budget of only $1 million, they believed that with Eric's current wealth, investing in this movie would not be a problem at all. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that they wanted to personally direct this movie, the two of them wouldn't have had to choose Eric. After thinking this through, Quentin and Lawrence also had lunch with relaxed faces. After waiting outside the Fox set for 2 hours, the two of them were already famished. After lunch, Eric picked up the script again. "I heard from Drew that the two of you plan to personally produce this movie?" "Yes, Eric, we already have experience in producing a movie before, so I think it's no problem for the two of us to work on this script alone." Eric nodded noncommittally and flipped through a few pages before saying, "You have your own movie company now, right?" The two of them didn't understand why Eric suddenly asked this. They looked at each other and Lawrence nodded. "Yes, it's called Band Apart." Quentin came up with the name, inspired by the movie master Goddard's early movie, The Other Bunch. Eric knew that Goddard had filmed the famous King Lear, but he didn't know about The Other Bunch, so he didn't know what the name of the movie company meant. He didn't want to know either. "It's like this, Lawrence. Quentin, are you interested in joining Firefly?" Huh. The two of them were confused at the same time. Eric explained, "I mean, your movie company is just an empty shell. Are you interested in joining my Firefly movie company? As you know, my company is growing." Quentin and Lawrence looked at each other. They had a certain understanding of Firefly. Although this movie company was established by Eric alone, and most of the movies it produced were just Eric's personal movies, its capabilities were not to be underestimated. If they could join, it would definitely be a good thing. However, the two of them were just nobodies now. They didn't understand why Eric would extend an olive branch to them. It didn't make sense no matter what. Chapter 177. P.S. I want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions. Search for the official WeChat account Dread and follow it now. Give more support to I Am Hollywood. Eric did not consider their thoughts. Quentin and Lawrence did not immediately agree, so he did not talk about this topic anymore. Anyway, as long as this cooperation went well, Firefly would definitely be Quentin and Lawrence's first choice to work with. Looking at his watch, Eric continued, "Let's put this matter aside for now. There's not much time left. Let's talk about the script. I can invest in this movie, and the budget is not limited to $1 million US. You two can film to your heart's content." Quentin and Lawrence were originally a little hesitant about Eric's invitation to join Firefly, but when they saw how easily the other party skipped over this matter, the two were disappointed at the same time. They keenly felt that they had missed a rare opportunity and regretted not agreeing immediately. This kind of emotion made the two unable to immediately react to Eric's words. It was not until Eric finished speaking and raised his head to stare at the two of them that Lawrence was the first to react. He confirmed with a happy expression, "Eric, are you serious?" Quentin also reacted at this time and looked at Eric with a look of surprise. Eric nodded again. "Of course it's true, but I have a few conditions." The two suddenly had an expression of "I knew it," and breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. If Eric came up and solicited and agreed to invest without any additional conditions, that would be strange. The two of them only hoped that Eric would not interfere too much with the production of the movie. First of all the actors in the movie must be selected from the UTA management company. Do you know UTA? In the end, Eric asked with uncertainty. He hadn't paid much attention to UTA's operations during this period of time. He only occasionally spoke to Capel Sid on the phone a few times. He roughly knew that the management company was doing well, but he wasn't too sure about the rest. Because of his increasing fame, he rarely interfered with UTA's management work in order to avoid suspicion. It wasn't that the media didn't pick on the matter of UTA's monopoly, but it didn't stir up any waves. In fact, the North American anti-monopoly law was not as strict as imagined. Decades ago, due to the Paramount Act, film companies could not operate theaters vertically. This law no longer had much binding force on major film companies. Although it did not exist in name, in North American theaters, just on the surface, the number of theaters owned by several major film companies had exceeded 1/10 of the total number of screens. The theaters selected by the major film companies were definitely the best locations. These 1/10 of the theaters were almost the essence of all the theaters in North America. The theaters secretly controlled by the major film companies were even larger. This was the result of the federal government turning a blind eye. Although the Paramount Act cut off the monopoly of the major film companies, it also caused a great blow to the Hollywood film industry. Now that the Hollywood film industry was developing rapidly, the scale of its profits was getting bigger and bigger. It even had a huge influence all over the world. Under such a good situation, the major film companies had extended their tentacles. If there were no strong forces interfering, the federal government would not be stupid enough to make a fuss and ruin the good situation. Hearing Eric's inquiry, Lawrence Band quickly nodded and said, of course I know." After that, Lawrence and his best friend looked at each other and said, "This condition is not a problem. Also, the script also needs some changes." After Eric finished speaking, Quentin immediately showed a displeased look, but he did not dare to show it too obviously. Eric just smiled slightly. "Don't worry, I'm very satisfied with the content. It's just that the name Rainbow Robber is too strange. I thought of another good name." While Quentin heaved a sigh of relief, Lawrence also heaved a huge sigh of relief. If Eric wanted to make any changes to the script, Lawrence was very worried that his best friend would jump out to oppose it and ruin the cooperation. Eric only proposed to change the name of the movie. There was nothing unacceptable about that. Eric lowered his head and picked up a pen to write 2 words directly on the script and handed it to the other side. Quentin and Lawrence leaned their heads over and read out the words in unison. "Drowning dogs." "Yes, drowning dogs." Eric showed a slightly mischievous smile. "I think this name is very appropriate for the plot. In my opinion, all the characters in the story are drowning dogs, aren't they?" This time Lawrence Band looked at Quentin. Quentin stretched out his index finger and scratched his broad forehead a few times. After hesitating for a while, he reluctantly nodded. "Okay, let's call it Drowning Dogs." In fact, in his heart, he also felt that this name was much better than the original one. However, as the author of the script, It was quite depressing to have the name of the movie directly changed by the young man opposite him. One more thing, I think 7 robbers is a little too much. 6 is good enough. I read the script. 3 of them died directly, and because of this, there were a few extra lines of dialogue in the plot that I think are a little redundant. Of course, I'm just making a suggestion here. It's up to you whether you want to change it or not. Eric said again. This small suggestion was just a last-minute idea he came up with. It was completely out of the bad taste of the classic B-movie version in his previous life. If Quentin was not willing to change it, it was not a big deal. The highlight of the script was the non-linear narrative structure. If everything was straightened out, it would be a very boring story. A gang leader gathered a few robbers with code names of different colors to rob a jewelry store of diamonds. In the end, they were betrayed by an undercover agent and surrounded by the police. A few of them died in a gunfight. The survivors escaped into the warehouse and started a series of confrontations. In the end, there was internal strife and everyone died together. That was all. The advantage of a movie was that it could use a variety of narratives to show an extremely mediocre company in a very interesting way. I'll think about it. Quentin nodded when he saw that Eric was really just making a suggestion. Although his first reaction was not to change it, he did not explicitly reject it. As for the final decision, he decided to go back and discuss it with his best friend. Then, I have no more questions here. Eric leaned back comfortably in his chair and looked at the two of them. Do you have any other questions? Quentin pulled the script over and pressed it under his hand before asking. Eric, about the movie director? Eric smiled and shrugged. Since I've agreed to invest, it definitely means that I've agreed to your previous conditions. I won't interfere with the content of this movie at all. You can do whatever you want. The final editing rights will also be yours. Eric did not have any expectations for this movie in the box office. In his memory, this movie was very famous, but it did not achieve any amazing box office results. However, it made a few good actors famous. This was what Eric was most interested in. As long as all the actors in Drowning Dog were from UTA, even if it only gained some fame in the end and did not recoup the cost, it was still worth it to Eric. The novel, I Am Hollywood, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend. Search for the public account Dread, and follow it. Hurry up. Chapter 178. At the thought of actors, Eric suddenly remembered that Michael Madsen, who played Mr. Kim in his previous life, was Virginia's brother. Although he had known Virginia for more than half a year, Eric had never met him. He only learned from the girl that Virginia had a very good relationship with her brother. In his memory, Michael Madsen had a rough appearance, as if he was born to play the villain. However, from Virginia's description, Eric knew that Michael Madsen was a very versatile person. He used to be a magician, liked photography, and loved to write poems. Compared to being an actor, it was more like a side job for him to make a living. Although he had never met Michael Madsen before, since Virginia was his woman, Michael Madsen could be considered as one of his own. Eric's principle had always been to keep the goodies within the family. After getting the script from Quentin and confirming the color, Eric said directly, Quentin, I happen to have a good candidate to recommend to you for Mr. Kim's role. I believe you'll definitely be satisfied. Seeing the smile on Eric's face, Quentin Tarantino knew that he had no choice but to be satisfied even if he was dissatisfied. However, Quentin was already overjoyed when Eric mentioned that he would not interfere with the production of the movie. It was not unacceptable for him to shove a person over. According to the rules as the investor, Eric could even decide on all the actors. No problem, Eric. I believe the person you recommend will definitely be good, Quentin replied with a smile. They were about to continue chatting when someone knocked on the door of the lounge. A staff member poked his head in. Director Williams, it's time. Eric looked at his watch and stood up. That's it then. Quentin and Lawrence also quickly stood up and shook hands with Eric again. After that, they were a little at a loss. What should they do next? Eric, who was about to leave in a hurry, saw the two of them and laughed. He patted his head and said, "Sorry, I've been too busy recently. I'm a bit forgetful. Come with me." Eric called his assistant Alan and gave him some instructions. Then he said to the two of them, "This is Alan, my assistant. He will take you to see Mr. Jeffrey Hansen. You can discuss the details with him." After sending the two of them off, Eric was just about to go back to work when the little girl suddenly popped up beside him. Eric was surprised. "Why haven't you left yet?" Drew, who was already unhappy, became even angrier when he heard Eric's words. He put his hands on his hips and retorted, "Why should I leave? I'm not leaving." Eric shrugged. Anyway, the little girl had been very obedient when she visited the set of Dark War a few days ago. "All right, as long as you don't cause trouble." "Well, Eric, I feel like they don't like me very much." The little girl stepped forward and hugged Eric's arm as they walked to the work area of the studio. At the same time, she whispered in his ear. When she was on the set of Dark War, she was treated like a little princess. There was no one she couldn't order aside from Eric. However, not only did she not know the staff here, but they also kept a distance from her. Although they were polite, they kept a vague distance. Eric called for the crew to start preparing. Then he rubbed the little girl's head and explained with a smile. "You don't understand? Jenny's father is the producer of this TV series. Everyone here was hired by John. Jenny is the princess here. She doesn't like you, so of course these people will keep a distance from you." "Oh, how snobbish." The little girl curled her lips. "It's just a natural reaction of people. If they are too close to you, they might inexplicably make things difficult for you." Eric sat down in the director's chair with a smile. He looked at the figures walking around preparing for the shoot, and took the shooting log from his assistant. In fact, the reason why Drew was alienated here was mainly because Jennifer Aniston was too popular in the crew. Although Jennifer Aniston also had her own likes and dislikes, she was very good at making friends. Not only did she get along well with the other leads, but even most of the crew liked her very much. In addition, Jennifer Aniston's father was the producer. It was not surprising that the crew of friends alienated Drew, a potential love rival of Jennifer Aniston. In comparison, although Drew was also very good at socializing, she was a little more eccentric. Before Eric appeared, the little girl usually did not have the qualifications and strength to show this side of her personality. However, now that she had Eric's support, the little girl did not seem to be so restrained anymore. When she visited the set of Dark War, she acted like a spoiled little princess. Only this girl would be able to carry a six-figure camera and wander around while he was nervously filming a movie without being chased out. However, Eric was not worried that this pampering would make the little girl lose control. He knew that Drew actually knew what she was doing. The little girl just lacked the love that she should have received when she was young. Once she received these things from Eric, she became a little greedy. She always wanted to take advantage of the fact that she was still legally underage to get more and make up for it. "Forget it, I'd better go back." The little girl stood up with Eric's help. Since she was not welcome here, the little girl did not want to spend the effort to change the situation. "Eric, did you do what you promised me last night?" "What?" Jennifer Aniston, who was holding the script, walked over. When she heard Drew's words, she frowned slightly and looked at Eric with dissatisfaction. "It's on the table in the study. Go take a look. I wrote a lot on the spur of the moment. You can pick one and do it yourself," Eric said as he gave Jennifer Aniston a look that said, "I'll explain to you later." Drew smiled sweetly. In front of Jennifer Aniston, she suddenly leaned over and kissed Eric on the cheek, leaving an eye-catching lipstick mark. Only then did she turn around and leave. "Wearing so little, she's like a street girl at night," Jennifer Aniston said in a sour tone as she watched Drew leave. The little girl was already over 1.6 meters tall. Not only was she slim and graceful, but she also had milky white skin that many women envied. In this regard, even Jennifer Aniston, who had darker skin, was a little jealous. As if she felt something, Drew, who was almost at the entrance of the studio, suddenly turned around. She opened the small parasol in her hand and put on a pair of heart-shaped sunglasses. She flipped around on her tiptoes and made a funny face at Jennifer Aniston while sticking her tongue out. This situation made Jennifer Aniston furious. Many of the crew members who saw this scene were stunned. Everyone present was in the film and television industry. Many of them had seen Kubrick's Lolita. The little girl was wearing a t-shirt and hot pants. Coupled with the black nail polish on her toes, she looked devilish. Every move she made was feminine and mischievous, making the hearts of men with normal hormones skip a beat. She's so unrestrained. Jennifer Aniston pulled a long face and said to Eric, "Are you sure you sent her to a Catholic school and not somewhere else?" Eric smiled and held Jennifer Aniston's small hand. "All right, Jenny, don't be angry. Drew's personality is like this. It's not like you haven't seen it before. By the way, why are you looking for me?" Jennifer Aniston pointed at Eric's cheek. "Wipe the lipstick mark on your face first." Eric awkwardly wiped his face with a tissue and asked Jennifer Aniston to confirm. Jennifer Aniston reluctantly discussed the script with Eric. She felt that she had some good ideas. In the next few days, the filming of Friends went on in an orderly manner. During this period, Eric had a meal with the Weinstein brothers of Miramax and talked about some acquisitions. However, because the Weinstein brothers had just released Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which had won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and had achieved good box office results, the price they offered was far beyond Eric's expectations. In addition, Firefly had begun to make contact with Robert Shea's new line, so Eric temporarily gave up on the idea of acquiring Miramax. In his previous life, Miramax stood out in the independent film industry and was recruited by Disney. In addition to Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which made Miramax famous, the biggest contributor was Quentin's Drowning Dog, Pulp Fiction, and other works, and the latter was obviously more important. In his previous life, because of the unexpected success of Quentin's Pulp Fiction, independent films quickly gained the attention of major film companies. As one of the best, Miramax was able to develop rapidly. But now, Quentin had defected to Eric. Since the two sides had cooperated, Eric would definitely not push Quentin away. Now that they had lost Quentin, Miramax's future prospects were uncertain. Although it could be said that they still had Soderbergh as their trump card. Ever since Soderbergh became famous with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival as the youngest director, he had been silent for a whole decade without any works to show. His box office was a mess, and it was only after the new century that he began to explode. Under such circumstances, it would be difficult for Miramax to rise on its original trajectory. The reason why Eric wanted to acquire Miramax at the same time as acquiring the new line was that he valued the brothers' talent in various awards and public relations. In his previous life, the Weinstein brothers were known as the gold medalists of the Oscars, so Eric made up his mind to recruit them. As for the other party's eye for films, Eric had a greater advantage in this regard. He had a lot of classic films he had watched in his previous life in his mind. Eric was not in a hurry to acquire Miramax for the time being. After all, the trajectory of history had changed. Perhaps with the talent of the Weinstein brothers, they could still survive in the independent film industry, but it was unlikely that they would be as dazzling as they were in his previous life because of Eric's existence. At most, the other party's development trajectory would be like the new line, growing stronger step by step. Then even if the other party developed for another 10 years, Eric would have a chance to recruit them and honestly win him an Oscar. Chapter 179. Vicky, is it the Sunset Tower Hotel diagonally opposite Arthur's? In the driver's seat, a rough-looking Caucasian man in his 30s stared at the road in front and asked, "Of course, are there two Sunset Tower hotels on Sunset Boulevard?" Virginia in the passenger seat answered. She took out a small mirror from her handbag and looked at her makeup. Then, she took out a lipstick and carefully dabbed it on the corners of her lips. This action somehow made the man in the driver's seat a little dissatisfied. "Vicky, I really don't understand. Why do you have to get involved with that kid? You two are 10 years apart." "I told you my personal affairs are none of your business," Virginia blurted out. She quickly realized that she shouldn't talk to her brother like that. Her tone softened a little. Mike, I'm very happy with him. Although he's young, he's very considerate to me. Michael Madsen was still frowning. That guy is destined to not give you any promises, isn't he? He won't marry you. When Virginia heard this, her eyes dimmed a little. She whispered, I never expected him to marry me. But you're already 28 years old. I hope you can find a reliable man to marry, not like now. Michael's tone was a little agitated. In the end, he couldn't help but pat the steering wheel. He turned to look at his sister. I hope you two are happy, Vicky. Will I be happy if I get married? Virginia put the lipstick and small mirror back into her handbag. Our parents are not happy at all. And you've already divorced once. Michael Madsen continued to persuade her. It's precisely because of this that I hope you can find a good man. There are definitely good men in this world. Even if you don't find the right one the first time, just try a few more times. You see, although I'm divorced, Gina and I are very happy now. In half a year, you may have a little nephew or niece. Okay, I know, Mike. Let's not talk about this today, okay? Like all the older women who were forced into marriage, Virginia began to change the topic. Because her parents were divorced and her mother was busy with her career, she was raised by her brother who was 4 years older than her. Therefore, even if she could ignore her parents' words, she valued her relationship with her brother very much. All right, I won't say anything if you don't like it. Michael Madsen looked at the road in front of him helplessly. Virginia heaved a sigh of relief when Michael stopped the topic. The two of them were quiet for a while. Looking out of the car window, they were about to reach the Sunset Tower Hotel. Virginia then said, Michael, I know you don't like him, but don't be rude later, okay? I hope you can get the role he mentioned. Michael Madsen said, Of course I won't be rude, but I'm only here to see your new movie. Don't expect me to please him for a role. Virginia was a little helpless. She knew her brother's character very well. To put it nicely, he was indifferent to fame and fortune. To put it bluntly, he did not want to improve. His original intention of being an actor was more to make a living than to become famous. And it was still the same now. As the two of them talked, they soon arrived at the Sunset Tower Hotel. Virginia saw a lot of paparazzi with cameras gathered outside the hotel. She quickly took out her sunglasses and put them on. But even so, it did not stop the paparazzi from discovering her. A group of people rushed over and took pictures of the car window. Seeing these guys who were willing to risk their lives for news, Michael had no choice but to slow down the car. This made the paparazzi even more excited. They slammed the car window and shouted at Virginia in the car. However, no matter how the paparazzi shouted themselves hoarse, they did not get any response. The brother and sister drove the car directly to the underground parking lot and walked into the hotel through the internal elevator. Another one. Julia Roberts just came. I wonder what the Fireflies are up to. The group of paparazzi was stopped by the security guards. They could only continue to wait outside the hotel in disappointment, hoping that the next guest would reveal some specific information. You've only been here for less than 10 minutes, Jake. In the past half an hour, several big shots in Hollywood have gone in. Oh, Kane, who else is here? The paparazzi named Jake asked. Kane leaned close to Jake's ear and whispered, Disney's CEO, Michael Eisner, a vice president in charge of distribution at Warner, Paramount's president, Donald Tarn, and Columbia's vice president, Amy Pascal. So far, 4 of the 7 major film companies have come. Let's wait and see. I think the remaining 3 will definitely send people here. Jake imagined the scene described by Kane, and could not help but gasp. No way. Is something big going to happen in Hollywood? Kane shook his head. I'm not sure about that, but it must be related to the Fireflies. I heard from an insider in the hotel that there will be a party tonight. Tonight? Jake looked at his watch. It's only 1:35. Did you make a mistake? If there's a party tonight, why would these big shots come here now? This is definitely not wrong. My informant is working in the kitchen. Their task is to prepare food for the party tonight. Jake asked, Kane, what do you think it will be? Maybe. Well, this is too abnormal. I can't think of anything. But recently, there was news that the Fireflies were planning to acquire New Line Cinema. I don't know if it has anything to do with this. New Line Cinema is already a top second-tier film company. If it merges with the Fireflies, with Eric Williams' blockbuster films and New Line Cinema's distribution ability, maybe in a few years, there will be a new giant in Hollywood. Jake guessed. Didn't you say that the Fireflies are taking the lead this time? Could it be that the Fireflies are looking for distributors for their new films, so the senior executives of the Big Seven have all gathered here? After this sentence, Kane and the other paparazzi who were listening to the conversation were stunned for a moment. Then they all laughed. One of the paparazzi said with a mocking expression, "How is that possible? You don't necessarily value the appeal of the Fireflies too much. If it's a film directed by Eric Williams himself, it might be able to attract the senior executives of the Big Seven. After all, he has fully proved his ability. But everyone knows that the distribution rights of Eric's next two films already belong to Fox." Jake also felt that his guess was somewhat unrealistic. He scratched his head and softly retorted, "Didn't you say that Island Horror and Smell a Woman were written by Eric Williams himself?" However, his words were not taken seriously by the other paparazzi. The group of people continued to discuss the purpose of these people gathering, and at the same time, they looked forward to the arrival of others. Most of the time, seemingly absurd guesses were actually true. This event was indeed just an internal screening organized by Fireflies for Island Horror and Steel Magnolias. When the invitation was sent out, Eric also thought that the Big Six would probably only send one or two ordinary executives. However, he soon received the first news. Disney's Michael Eisner had asked his assistant to contact Fireflies and said that he would personally watch the film. This response alone made Eric, who had originally planned to hold the screening in the small screening room at Firefly's headquarters, change the location of the screening to the luxurious screening room at the Sunset Tower Hotel. After all, Michael Eisner's status was very high. It would be very disrespectful to make do with the screening in Firefly's small screening room. Next, the other major film companies might have heard the news that Michael Eisner would participate in the screening, and they all said that they would send important executives to attend. However, only Michael Eisner, the CEO of the Big Seven, was present. As for the others, Paramount had sent a president. Amy Pascal, who had a good relationship with Eric, had come from Columbia. The other companies had either sent vice presidents or high-ranking executives. Even so, this lineup could be considered luxurious. The executives of the Big Seven film companies gathered together just for the distribution rights of one or two films. It was estimated that this had not happened in the past 10 years. Virginia and her brother took the elevator to the floor where the screening was. As soon as they walked out, Virginia saw Eric's assistant, Alan Fissman, waiting by the elevator. "Hello, Alan. Where's Eric?" Virginia asked. "Mr. Williams is very busy. He can't come out to pick you up. Miss Matson, please come with me." "I'll take you to the lounge," Alan said politely. Virginia nodded in disappointment. Michael Madsen, who saw this scene, didn't know the specific situation. He directly thought that Eric was a little cold to his sister, and he was very angry. However, although he was very angry, he didn't show it. The two followed Alan to a lounge. After walking in, Virginia saw that a lot of people had gathered in the lounge. The director of Steel Magnolias, Herbert Ross, and the lead actors Julia Roberts, Sally Field, Shirley Mike, Ryan, and others. However, only Jonathan Demme was alone in the Scary Island crew. He looked a little miserable. This situation was not difficult to understand. The two small actors in Scary Island were not suitable for the screening in the afternoon, so they did not come. The other actors were not famous and were not the lead actors, so they were not qualified to participate in this screening. The Steel Magnolias crew was different. Needless to say, Herbert Ross was the director. Although Steel Magnolias was a group film, in addition to the famous Julia Roberts, Sally Field, Shirley Mike, and Ryan had a series of Oscar awards. Their qualifications and fame were even higher than Julia's. The other three female leads were also actresses who had been famous for a long time. Seeing Virginia appear, Jonathan Demme finally showed an expression as if he had seen a comrade. He stood up and greeted Virginia. The members of the Steel Magnolias crew also stood up and greeted the girl. Chapter 180. In another room near the lounge of the two crews, Eric was chatting with the big shots of other companies who had already arrived. Although these executives worked for different masters, many of them were actually very familiar with each other. There was no sense of unfamiliarity when they chatted, because the executives of the 7 major film companies moved around very frequently. For example, Barry Diller, who was not present, was in charge of Paramount in 1984, and was now the CEO of Fox. Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who were originally at Paramount, were both Barry Diller's deputies at that time. One of them was now the CEO of Disney, and the other was the president of Disney. If history did not change, Jeffrey Katzenberg would be the CEO of DreamWorks in a few years. And Amy Pascal of Columbia was an executive at Fox before she joined the company. The major film companies relied on these intricate interpersonal relationships to ensure that they competed with each other and had full cooperation with each other. Eric, how much box office are you going to get for the 2 movies this time? Tell us first, so that we can have a reference when we quote. Michael Eisner asked in front of the others. Although he acted as if nothing had happened, there was an inexplicable expectation in his eyes. Eric put down the coffee cup and said with a smile, Mr. Eisner, to be honest, I can only guarantee that the quality of these 2 movies is very good. As for how much box office they can get, it depends on the reaction of the audience and the market. That won't do. You're so young, but you've become so tactful. Young people have to be a little bold and daring. Paramount's president, Bernard Tarn, said. The other party was an old man who was almost 60 years old. He had a head full of white hair and a face full of smiles. He had an amiable look on his face. When he said this, it sounded like an elder encouraging the younger generation. It would naturally make people feel close to him. Eric smiled and showed a humble look, but in fact, he was cursing in his heart. These old guys were slicker than the other. If he really listened to their opinions, he would be cheated and still have to count the money for them. Speaking of which, ever since Barry Diller, Michael Eisner, and the others left with a large number of senior executives, Paramount had suffered a great loss. Now their movie performance was in a mess. This year, they only had 1 movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the producer and director of Raiders of the Lost Ark were the famous George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Both of them were very shrewd movie businessmen. Paramount would probably be able to earn some money from the distribution of the movie. Most of the profits would definitely be divided between George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. In the previous analysis, Eric felt that Paramount might be the one who offered the highest price. This time, the test would use the method of closed bidding. After everyone watched the film, they would each offer their own conditions. Firefly would decide which party to cooperate with based on the terms offered by several film companies. However, the appearance of Michael Eisner suddenly made the originally predictable result worse, because Michael Eisner's attention was likely to arouse competition from several other major film companies. After all, he only used a short 5 years to make Disney's performance soar. Now his status in Hollywood was even faintly surpassing that of his old boss, Barry Diller. Alan Fissman gently pushed the door open and walked quietly to Eric. He tried not to stand out. He bent down and said in Eric's ear, Mr. Williams, the people from Fox are here. Eric nodded and smiled at Michael Eisner and the others. I'm sorry, everyone. Please wait a moment. I'm going to pick someone up. Walking out of the room, Eric led Alan to the elevator. He guessed that the other party would be coming up soon. At this time, Alan said, Mike, the receptionist downstairs, said that 2 people from Fox came. In addition to Calta Hunt, there's also a woman. Eric was stunned for a moment before asking, Do you know who she is? Alan shook his head. I don't know. Mike said that the girl is only about 20 years old. She's very young, but Calta Hunt is very respectful to her. Calta Hunt was in charge of Fox's film distribution. In terms of rank, she was also a vice president. The only people who could make her maintain respect were probably Barry Diller and a few others. Among them, there was definitely not a girl about 20 years old. Since he couldn't figure it out, Eric stopped thinking about it. When he came to the elevator, a man and a woman walked out with a soft ding. Hello, Calta. Eric walked up with a smile and gently hugged Calta Hunt. At the same time, he glanced at the blonde standing beside Kalta and looking at him with great interest. The girl looked to be about 20 years old, with a height of 1.7 meters. Her short blonde hair just covered her ears. She was very beautiful, with a sharp face and slender eyebrows. She was wearing a black and white checkered shirt, pale yellow casual pants, and black flats. This should be a standard career woman, Eric thought. She had a very similar temperament to Amy Pascal, who was sitting in the lounge. After greeting Kalta, Kalta was about to help introduce him. The girl took the initiative to extend her hand. "Hello, Mr. Williams. My name is Elizabeth Murdoch." Eric raised his eyebrows slightly. She was from the Murdoch family. Based on Kalta Hunt's attitude towards the girl, Eric felt that she should be a direct relative of Rupert Murdoch. "Hello, Miss Murdoch. You can call me Eric." The girl let go of Eric's hand and asked seriously, "Then why don't you call me Elizabeth?" What an aggressive woman, Eric thought to himself. He said unhurriedly, "It's because we've just met." It's inappropriate to call a girl by her name without permission. Elizabeth Murdoch raised her chin slightly and looked at Eric. "Well, Eric, I allow you to call me Elizabeth." Seeing Eric's awkward expression, Kalta Hunt quickly smoothed things over. "Eric, Elizabeth is Mr. Rupert Murdoch's second daughter. Recently, she has been interning at Fox. She is very interested in your movie, so she wants to see it. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," Eric said with a smile. "Let's go to the lounge. The audition will start at 2 o'clock. It will be a while." They walked together to the lounge at the end of the corridor. Elizabeth Murdoch took the initiative to go to Eric's side. Alan took a step back and followed behind the three. Chapter 181. "Hey Eric, I've seen all your movies, but other than Dark War, I think the others are just average." "Thank you for your praise, Elizabeth." "I'm not praising you," the girl said angrily. "I'm just curious. How did your movies achieve such amazing box office results? This is a very interesting topic. I plan to use it as my graduation thesis." "You're studying media?" Eric guessed after contacting the other party's family background. "Of course, I'm studying at Vassar College in New York. I'll graduate next year." Eric just nodded and didn't express any opinions. Although he had taken over this body and inherited most of the memories, he couldn't even remember the full list of Ivy League schools, let alone Vassar College. The girl was a little dissatisfied with Eric's understatement. "Haven't you heard of Vassar College?" Eric spread his hands. "Elizabeth, actually, I only studied until I graduated from high school. I can't even remember the full list of Ivy League schools, so." "Okay." The girl shrugged helplessly. She was even more interested in Eric. A young man who didn't even graduate from college could achieve so much in such a short time. It was really strange. The executives of Universal and MGM arrived at about 2 o'clock. After everyone arrived, the staff led everyone to a luxurious screening room at the Sunset Hotel. Eric just nodded to Virginia and the others and sat in the first row. On both sides were Michael Eisner and Paramount CEO, Leonard Tarn. After they dispersed, there were the executives of the other 5 major companies. There were exactly 8 people in the first row. Elizabeth Murdoch, who came uninvited, didn't make things difficult for the workers. She took the initiative to sit in the back row with the crew members of Island Horror and Steel Magnolias. She even moved closer to Julia. Julia looked at the strange girl who suddenly appeared beside her and felt strange. She didn't know who this woman was, but thinking of Eric's Playboy character, she naturally classified this girl as someone similar to Virginia. So she had some hostility towards Elizabeth Murdoch. Although Julia had already made up her mind not to have too much to do with Eric, Eric was destined to leave a deep impression in the girl's heart. This kind of imprint even caused Julia to unconsciously compare other men with Eric when she dated them. And then it would be difficult to have any more after that. Diller McDermott, who played the role of Julia's husband in Steel Magnolias, had pursued Julia during the filming. He was tall and handsome, and had graduated from New York's private Fordham University Drama School. He was also very talented and had a gentle and considerate personality, completely unlike Eric, who was rude and unreasonable. Therefore, Julia also tried to get along with him. In the end, after the filming of Steel Magnolias was completed, Julia couldn't have many sparks with him due to the interference of the shadow in her heart. In the end, everything ended without any results. Therefore, during this period of time, Julia had been hating Eric. She felt that Eric had affected her private life. In order to avoid this kind of influence from deepening, Julia didn't meet with Eric even once during the filming of Steel Magnolias, although she was in Los Angeles. While the staff was preparing for the screening, Elizabeth Murdoch greeted Julia. After getting a response, she asked softly, "Miss Julia, what kind of person do you think Eric Williams is?" "He's a bastard." Julia was inexplicably immersed in some kind of emotion because of Elizabeth's approach and blurted it out without thinking. "Oh." Elizabeth was speechless and looked at Julia strangely. Julia's voice was very low, and with the soft chatter of others in the screening room, only 2 or 3 people around her heard the girl's words. Sitting on the other side of the girl, Sally Field couldn't help but chuckle. As an experienced person, and having heard some rumors about Julia and Eric, of course she could hear the jealousy in Julia's words of a little woman who hadn't been satisfied with her feelings. After Julia reacted, her face immediately turned red. She was so embarrassed that she almost wanted to run away. Fortunately, the lights in the screening room dimmed at this time, allowing Julia to breathe a sigh of relief. Elizabeth Murdoch sat up straight, and couldn't help but glance at the girl next to her a few times before focusing her attention on the screen. As the most important of the 3 movies Eric had invested in, Island Horror was naturally placed as the finale of the second half. The first to play was Herbert Ross's Steel Magnolias. The plot of Steel Magnolias seemed very trivial. It was mainly about the daily lives of the 6 women, with the Eanton family's wedding, Easter, Christmas, New Year's, funeral, and other important dates as the main plot. Although Herbert Ross also added some comedy elements, in the medium term, this was still a drama film. The movie began with the wedding of Shelby Eanton, played by Julia. Through the first 10 minutes of the narrative, a few trivial things were connected, and the 6 heroines with different personalities were shown one by one in front of the audience. After Shelby's wedding, the new year arrived. The hairdresser, Arnell, who was originally shy and inferior because of some things, gradually became more open. At Shelby's wedding, she met the waiter. The two fell in love and soon lived together. Arnell felt that it was not easy for her to live such a happy life. She began to indulge in Christ and never forgot to pray. Shelby suffered from hyperinsulinemia, which was the opposite of diabetic people who lacked insulin. This disease caused malignant hypoglycemia. Once the disease broke out, the person would faint when their blood sugar dropped. Therefore, under the doctor's advice, Shelby was not suitable for childbirth. However, after marriage, because of Shelby's medical diagnosis, she could not adopt a child. Therefore, Shelby hid it from her parents and insisted on getting pregnant. Bit by bit, life slowly passed. Shelby's child was successfully born, but another piece of bad news befell the entire family. Shelby's kidneys were severely damaged and failed because of childbirth. Under such circumstances, her mother, who had always been strict with her, secretly stood up and gave one of her kidneys to her daughter. The operation was successful, and Shelby seemed to have returned to her normal life. However, life was not always the way it was. Her son slowly grew up, and Shelby continued to devote herself to the career she loved. Suddenly one day, when Shelby was at home taking care of her child, she fainted on the floor. When she was sent to the hospital, the poor woman could only rely on the life support machine to maintain her vital signs. Her mother stayed by Shelby's side day and night, but still could not wake her up. In the end, her husband signed some documents with tears in his eyes, and the hospital removed the life support machine. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.